Chapter 309. Whoosh, whoosh. Even with the strength of the iron-armed ape, it was extremely difficult for it to stop a barbarian-level blood fiend and 6 berserk-level blood fiends. Before Gray could check the results of his attack on the ghost-faced spider, the 3 berserk-level blood fiends had broken through the iron-armed ape's blockade and were chasing after Gray. The sharp claws of the 3 blood fiends glinted coldly as they pounced on Gray with their huge calf-like bodies. It seemed that Gray was about to be pinned to the ground by the 3 berserk-level blood fiends. Bang! Suddenly, a large number of vines twisted and intertwined in front of Gray and turned into a huge wall of vines, blocking the 3 berserk-level blood fiends. At this critical moment, Gray used his plant ability. Whoosh! Gray quickly retreated. His plant ability would not be able to stop the 3 berserk-level blood fiends for long. After all, the power of his plant ability was only at the special level. Sure enough, the wall of vines was quickly broken under the continuous impact of the 3 berserk-level blood fiends. Once again, the 3 berserk-level blood fiends pounced on Gray. Puff, puff, puff. However, Gray had enough time to react. 5 ice wind blades slashed out and sent the 3 berserk-level blood fiends flying backward. A layer of ice formed on their bodies. Only then did Gray have time to check the condition of the ghost-faced spider. He saw the ghost-faced spider lying quietly on the ground in the distance. There were several crisscrossing wounds on its face, which are the result of Gray's ice wind blades. Success! Looking at the ghost-faced spider that had stopped moving, Gray heaved a sigh of relief. After destroying the ghost-faced spider, there was still 1 barbarian-level blood fiend and 6 berserk-level blood fiends that could not use their blood ability. There was still a chance of winning this battle. Whoosh! Whoosh! At this moment, 2 more huge figures pounced on Gray. Together with the previous 3 blood fiends, there were 5 berserk-level blood fiends besieging Gray. With the exception of the corpse-hair ape, the rest of the berserk-level blood fiends had already besieged Gray. Gray's expression was grave. Facing 5 berserk-level blood fiends, he felt a lot of pressure. Swish! Swish! A series of icy wind blades slashed out, blocking the approach of the 5 blood fiends. 3 of the blood fiends were sent flying by the frigid ice wind blades, but 2 of them managed to break through the frigid ice wind blades' interception and pounced towards Gray. Its sharp claws flickered with cold light and were actually a foot long. At this moment, a large number of plants and vines suddenly swept out in front of Gray. Vine whips covered the space in front of Gray. The 2 berserk blood fiends that were about to pounce on Gray were immediately sent flying by the vines. Although Gray was under a lot of pressure, he was still able to fend off the siege of the 5 berserk-level blood fiends. Suddenly, behind Gray, an ape-type blood fiend with white fur appeared. In the darkness of the night, he appeared like a ghost and punched Gray's back with his white furry fist. It was too sudden, too sudden. Gray did not have time to dodge and was sent flying by the fist. He only stopped after breaking several trees. Gray felt a burning pain on his back. The punch from the corpse-hair ape was not light. Fortunately, his body's defense was strong, so the injury was not too serious. Swish! 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 5 berserk-level blood fiends pounced, while the corpse-hair ape's figure flashed and hid in the dense forest. Gray did not care about the hiding corpse-hair ape. He frantically slashed out icy wind blades to intercept the 5 berserk-level blood fiends. Puff! Puff! Suddenly, behind him, the corpse-hair ape attacked again. At this moment, Gray turned around abruptly. The demonic sword in his hand was surrounded by lightning, and he swept it behind him. Puff! The demonic sword slashed the corpse-hair ape's body before its fist could land. The corpse-hair ape was sent flying. It squeaked in pain when it landed on the ground. A clear burn mark appeared on its body, and the white fur around it was burned black. Gray did not stop there. Puff! 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 As long as the corpse-hair ape was killed, the other blood fiends would naturally stop. Therefore, Gray did not hesitate to make the corpse-hair ape his main target. The corpse-hair ape fled in panic when the ice wind blade struck. However, the 5 ice wind blades formed a fan and covered all the space around it. Puff! The corpse hair ape was hit by one of the wind blades and turned into an ice sculpture under the effect of the cold air. Puff! 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 Gray was about to add a few more ice wind blades when he suddenly realized that he was almost surrounded by 5 berserk-level blood fiends. He quickly retreated, but 2 blood fiends still pounced on him. Puff! Puff! Since he could not dodge in time, the clothes on his back and chest were torn, and 2 bloody wounds appeared. Puff! Puff! The demonic sword in his hand swept out twice and sent the 2 blood fiends flying. Gray hurriedly retreated. While Gray was surrounded by 6 berserk-level blood fiends, the iron-armed barbarian ape was also fighting fiercely with the tusked boar. The commotion was even greater than that of Gray. The iron-armed barbarian ape leaped a few times and arrived in front of the tusked boar. Its fist, which was as thick as a water tank, smashed down and sent the tusked boar flying. It pounced on the tusked boar again, but the tusked boar had already gotten up. Whoa! The tusked boar neighed, and a huge invisible shock wave swept toward the iron-armed barbarian ape. The ape blocked the shock wave with its 2 iron arms in front of its body. The powerful shock wave collided with the iron-armed barbarian ape's arms, producing violent banging sounds. The iron-armed barbarian ape's arms were indestructible, and even the shock wave from the tusked boar could not destroy them. However, the shock wave covered a large area, and the iron-armed barbarian ape's arms could not block every part of its body. Suddenly, many strange cracks appeared on the iron-armed barbarian ape's body, and its body involuntarily flew backwards. Bang! 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 The iron-armed barbarian ape's fists landed on the tusked boar from time to time, and the terrifying shock wave from the tusked boar also knocked the ape away from time to time. The surrounding trees collapsed and shattered into pieces. Even the mountain rocks were no exception. Once the sound wave passed, everything was shattered. Whoosh! After temporarily getting rid of the 5 berserk-level blood fiends, Gray looked for the corpse hair ape, only to find that it had already broken free from the ice on its body and was hiding. Puff! Puff! Under the siege of the corpse hair ape and the 5 berserk-level blood fiends, Gray's body was covered in wounds one after another. Some were scratched by the blood fiends, while others were smashed by the corpse hair ape's fists. He had to deal with the siege of the 5 berserk-level blood fiends and the sneak attack of the corpse hair ape at the same time. He could not take care of both sides at the same time. If he blocked the siege of the 5 berserk-level blood fiends, he would miss the sneak attack of the corpse hair ape. If he blocked the sneak attack of the corpse hair ape, he would not be able to block the siege of the 5 berserk-level blood fiends. Puff! 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 The icy wind blades were extremely sharp. Unfortunately, these berserk-level blood fiends had huge bodies and thick skin. As long as their heads were not damaged, they would not lose their ability to move. It was very difficult to completely destroy them. However, under the continuous slashes of the icy wind blades, some of the blood fiends could no longer resist. Puff! An ox-type blood fiend was slashed in the same spot multiple times and was immediately split into 2 halves, completely losing its ability to move. After one blood fiend was destroyed, Gray immediately felt the pressure on him lighten. He was no longer scratched by the blood fiends or attacked by the corpse hair ape from time to time. In contrast, the pressure on the corpse hair ape and the other 4 blood fiends from Gray increased. Puff! A berserk-level blood fiend with the body of tiger and the head of a lion was also split into 2 halves after being slashed multiple times. The pressure on Gray lessened once again. Puff! Another blood fiend was split into 2 halves. Only 2 berserk-level blood fiends and the corpse hair ape were left besieging Gray. Gray was completely relieved of the pressure. He continuously slashed out icy wind blades and quickly killed the remaining 2 berserk-level blood fiends. Then, he glanced at the corpse hair ape. At this moment, the corpse hair ape finally sensed that something was wrong. It hurriedly turned around and fled into the dense forest. It did not run in the direction of the fanged boar, but in the depths of the dense forest. Obviously, it was preparing to escape. Whoosh! Naturally, Gray would not let it escape. Otherwise, all his previous efforts would be in vain. All his previous efforts would be in vain, and all his injuries would be in vain. The corpse hare ape jumped nimbly in the forest from one giant tree to another. Its body floated erratically, making it difficult to lock onto it. If it were not for Gray's night vision, it was very likely that it would have escaped. Puff! The corpse hare ape jumped away from a tree that required more than a dozen people to wrap their arms around it. The next moment, the tree that required more than a dozen people to wrap their arms around it was suddenly split into two from the middle. The upper part of the tree fell to the ground with a rumble. Puff! 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 Giant trees were constantly being chopped down by the icy wind blades, and the corpse hare ape was fleeing in a sorry state. Puff! Finally, the corpse hare ape could not dodge in time and was hit by an icy wind blade. A huge wound appeared on its body, and it was instantly frozen. Gray naturally would not let go of such an opportunity. Swoosh! 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 5 icy wind blades slashed the frozen corpse hare ape's body. Several huge wounds appeared on the corpse hare ape's body, and it was thrown away heavily. It crashed into a tree and was embedded into the tree before falling down powerlessly. Gray quickly chased after the corpse hare ape. The demonic sword in his hand was surrounded by lightning. He stabbed the sword at the frozen and immobile corpse hare ape's chest. Swoosh! The demonic sword penetrated the corpse hare ape's chest. The corpse hare ape struggled a few times before it stopped. Chapter 310. Bang! Just as Gray killed the corpse hare ape, the huge fang boar, which was fighting with the iron-armed barbarian ape in the distance, suddenly collapsed and stopped moving. It's finally dead. Seeing that the corpse hare ape was completely dead, Gray heaved a sigh of relief and hurriedly took out the rune bag to collect the blood. At this moment, he was in tatters and looked no better than a beggar on the streets. There were more than a dozen wounds all over his body. Some were scratched by the sharp claws, and some were punched by the corpse hare ape. Ants could even bite an elephant to death if there were many of them. Furthermore, each of these blood fiends was a berserk-level blood fiend that was stronger than an elephant. Even if they only had the strength of their physical bodies, they were still extremely difficult to deal with. After collecting all the blood, Gray obtained about 200 portions of blood. He glanced at the corpse of the corpse hare ape and collected it as well. The corpse of the corpse hare ape was an extremely rare blood fiend. Its corpse was extremely valuable and could even be used to refine a demonic weapon with the ability to control corpses. Unfortunately, the refining method had been lost. Even so, it was still worth collecting. When he returned to the place where the iron-armed barbarian ape and the fang boar were fighting, he saw the injured iron-armed barbarian ape. Under the terrifying sound wave attack of the fang boar, the iron-armed barbarian ape was covered in wounds except for its indestructible arms. After the continuous battles, Gray did not have much blood energy left and was not able to use the reverse nurturing ability. He had no choice but to temporarily store the iron-armed barbarian ape and wait for his blood energy to recover before treating the injuries on his body and the iron-armed barbarian ape. Gray glanced at the corpse of the fanged boar beside him. It was the corpse of a blood fiend that could display the strength of a barbarian-level blood fiend. The rune space bag had a volume of 1,000 cubic meters. It was more than enough to store a few barbarian-level blood fiends. After leaving the hills, Gray returned to the place where the Red Wing had set up camp. The group of mercenaries had not yet fallen asleep. They were all shocked by the huge commotion. How could they possibly fall asleep? Although the place where they set up camp was quite far from the hills, they could still hear the commotion. It could be seen that the battle between the iron-armed barbarian ape and the fang boar had caused a huge commotion. Young Master Gray. When they saw Gray return, they all greeted him. However, when they saw the wounds on Gray's body, they couldn't help but be shocked. Young Master Gray, are you injured? The strength that Gray had displayed in the past few days had already caused these people to deeply revere him. At this moment, seeing that Gray was actually injured, they were all greatly shocked. What? Young Master Gray is injured? Alice and the other higher-ups of the Red Wing came out of the tent and were shocked to see Gray with more than a dozen wounds on his body. "Wait a moment. I'll go get the green jade hemostatic ointment." Alice quickly ran back to the tent to get the green jade hemostatic ointment. After applying the green jade hemostatic ointment on Gray's wounds and wrapping some white bandages around Gray's wounds, Alice asked, "Young Master Gray, was the commotion just now caused by your battle with the corpse hair ape?" "Yes." Gray nodded and admitted it. Hearing Gray's admission, Alice and the other higher-ups of the Red Wings mercenary group couldn't help but inhale a breath of cold air. Previously, they had seen the blood fiends guarding the corpse hair ape. Just counting the blood fiends, there were about 10 mad-level blood fiends and 2 barbarian-level blood fiends. Gray actually attacked the corpse hair ape. Moreover, he only suffered a minor injury and successfully escaped. Several people felt that Gray's strength was even more powerful. They didn't think that Gray had killed the corpse hair ape because the possibility was too low. Under the protection of 2 barbarian-level blood fiends and about 10 mad-level blood fiends, Gray was still able to kill the corpse hair ape. How powerful was Gray? At the very least, he had to be a barbarian blood warrior. Moreover, he couldn't be an ordinary barbarian blood warrior because an ordinary barbarian blood warrior would never be able to do that. Although they admired Gray's strength, they didn't think that Gray would be able to do that. "Young Master Gray, give up for now. It won't be too late to come back after you become a barbarian blood warrior," Alice suggested seriously. "Yes, young Master Gray. With your talent, there is no need for you to take such a risk." Hobbs also tried to persuade him. "I understand." Gray nodded. He naturally understood the logic of the other party's words. If the blood of the corpse hair ape wasn't too important to him, and if there wasn't an iron-armed barbarian blood fiend in his rune space bag, he would never attack the corpse hair ape. The next day, Gray didn't mention anything about attacking the corpse hair ape. The Red Wing members were completely relieved. "Look, there are so many blood fiend corpses over there. Why did the forest disappear? I don't see the corpse hair ape. It seems to have disappeared." However, just as they were about to leave the area and check out the safe route, they couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. The corpse hair ape and the blood fiends had disappeared without a trace. All that was left was a large area of destruction and a large number of blood fiend corpses. This is the corpse of one of the barbarian blood fiends? Suddenly, one of the mercenaries pointed at a place and was dumbfounded. Everyone followed his gaze and couldn't help but be dumbfounded. The corpse of a huge spider blood fiend, whose torso was 6 meters long, was lying there quietly. It didn't move at all. It didn't make a sound. The surface of its body was covered with crisscrossing wounds. They couldn't be more familiar with those wounds. During the time they spent with Gray, the blood fiends that were killed by Gray had similar wounds. "Young Master Gray, the corpse hair ape has disappeared," Alice hurriedly reported to Gray. She knew how important the corpse hair ape was to Gray. Now that the corpse hair ape had disappeared, it was definitely bad news for Gray. "I know." However, what surprised her was that Gray didn't panic after hearing the news. He actually knew about the disappearance of the corpse hair ape. Logically speaking, he shouldn't be so calm, unless, "Young Master Gray, could it be that you've already killed the corpse hair ape?" She looked at Gray in astonishment. "Yes, I did kill it last night." Gray nodded. As it involved the rune space bag and the iron-armed barbarian ape, he didn't intend to take the initiative to reveal it. However, since the other party had found out and asked about it, he naturally wouldn't hide it. Hiss! Everyone who heard this couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. The corpse hair ape was still killed by Gray under the protection of 2 barbarian blood fiends and about 10 berserk blood fiends. How powerful was Gray now? After that, Gray led the Red Wing to search for barbarian blood fiends in the Thunder Forest. In terms of combat, the Red Wing couldn't provide much help to Gray. However, the Red Wing was exceptionally good at searching for blood fiends. With their help, Gray found it much easier to search for barbarian blood fiends. 2 days later, Gray met a suitable barbarian blood fiend, the Ghost Blade Mantis. This was a type of barbarian blood fiend with a green body. Although it couldn't use its blood fiend abilities, it had a pair of huge and sharp sickles that could easily cut through hard metal. However, It met the iron-armed barbarian ape, as if it had met its nemesis. The iron-armed barbarian ape's indestructible iron arms and enormous strength were its nemesis. The huge sickles slashed the iron-armed barbarian ape's arms. Other than bursting into sparks, there was no other effect. The iron-armed barbarian ape took the opportunity to grab the sickles and violently smash them around in the forest. In the end, it was on the verge of death and was stabbed to death by Gray's sword. 3 days later, Gray met another suitable barbarian blood fiend, the brood ant. This was a type of barbarian blood fiend with a black iron body. It was also a type of blood fiend with a pure physical body. Its black iron armor had a powerful defense that was not inferior to the iron-armed barbarian ape's body. Its greatest feature was its enormous strength. As a strength-type blood fiend, it had a terrifying strength that could be ranked at the forefront of its kind. Even the iron-armed barbarian ape was inferior to it in terms of strength. Gray and the iron-armed barbarian ape went into battle together. It took a lot of effort, and the iron-armed barbarian ape was almost crippled before they were able to kill it. 5 days later, Gray met a barbarian blood fiend, the silver rhinoceros. This was a silver-colored barbaric-level blood beast with a powerful defense. Its defense was so powerful that it could reach the top of the blood beasts of the same realm. If the iron-armed barbarian ape's arms were not included, its defense was even stronger than the iron-armed barbarian ape. Gray and the iron-armed barbarian ape besieged it, but in the end, it was a failure. Whether it was Gray's attack or the iron-armed barbarian ape's attack, they could not cause too much damage to it. In the end, they could only give up. 3 days later, Gray met a barbarian blood fiend that he did not know its specific species. He only recognized that it was a bear-type blood fiend. This blood fiend was 7 meters tall and covered in gray fur. It was a foot long. This was the same type of barbarian blood fiend that Rob Tracy had used to attack the Fergus family. Its strength and defense were both quite strong. After a battle, it was killed. At this point, Gray had a total of 5 barbarian blood fiends in his possession. The 1,000 cubic meter huge rune space bag was almost filled to the brim and could not hold any more. Gray did not hunt any more barbarian blood fiends. He kept 4 for his own use, and handed the last one to Earl Fergus to control. The number of blood fiends was just right. I've spent about half a month in total. It's time to leave. A few days later, Gray and the Red Wing walked out of Thunder Forest. Chapter 311. Young Master Gray were already 300 miles away from Duke Niam's territory. After walking out of the Thunder Forest and observing the surrounding terrain, Alice took out a map and carefully compared it. That's good. Gray nodded. Since they knew that the identities of the 2 young nobles might not be simple, Gray and the others naturally couldn't go back to the small town. During the process of hunting the barbaric-level blood fiends, they didn't travel aimlessly. Instead, they hunted the blood fiends while heading out of Duke Niam's territory. As for things like carriages and horses, they could wait until they left the Thunder Forest before purchasing them. This time, both Gray and the Red Wing had a bountiful harvest, so this amount of money was naturally nothing to them. I'm afraid the other party's strength is quite great. Although we've left Duke Niam's territory, it doesn't mean we're absolutely safe. Gray said, to be on the safe side, don't enter the towns around the Thunder Forest. Once we're far away from the Thunder Forest on foot, let someone enter the town to buy carriages and horses. Understood. Hobbs nodded solemnly and then said, Young Master Gray, I want to let someone disguise himself and sneak into Duke Niam's territory to inquire about the identities of the 2 nobles. Okay, but be careful. Don't expose us because of this. Gray thought for a while and agreed. Knowing the other party's identity would allow them to take precautions in the future. If they didn't even know the identity of the enemy, they might inexplicably bump into them in the future. Moreover, Gray also wanted to know what kind of power the other party came from. How could they be so arrogant as to send someone to intercept and kill when they couldn't buy it? They were simply unscrupulous. Although the person who sent someone to intercept and kill them had been killed, this matter obviously wasn't over. Whether it was for the other party or for Gray, this matter was far from over. The other party was determined to get the silver medal ball and would never give it up so easily. and Gray himself would never let them go so easily. First, he had to find out the other party's identity. Even if he wasn't a match for them at the moment, he would definitely make the other party pay for this matter when his strength was enough in the future. Gray was quite confident about his future strength. With the blood of a king-level blood fiend in his hands, he already had the key to becoming a king-level blood fiend. He didn't believe that he would never be a match for his opponent. Far away from the Thunder Forest, Gray bought a carriage in a small town and returned to Sydney with the Red Wing. Along the way, they were quite cautious. They did not enter the cities and towns, but set up camp in the wilderness for the night. More than 10 days later, they appeared not far from Sydney. At this time, the people who were sent to gather information had returned. In a huge tent, Gray, Hobbs, and Alice were inside. "Bowen, how is it? Did you find anything?" Hobbs looked at a young man in his 20s and asked. This young man was the one who had been sent to scout for information. He was a very steady and clever mercenary. It was because of this that he was sent to scout for information. "Got it." Speaking of the information, the young man's face suddenly became serious. He lowered his voice so that only a few people in the tent could hear him. "The other party is a member of the Nahum family." Hiss! There was the sound of a breath of cold air in the tent. Gray and the other two's faces changed. They were all shocked by this news. Duke Nahum's territory, the Nahum family. Just from a name alone, it was not difficult to connect the two. The other party must be from the Nahum family, one of the 3 Duke families in the kingdom. It's actually the Nahum family. Hobbs's eyes were filled with fear, and Alice's face became extremely serious. The Nahum family. Even Gray's face could not help but change slightly. At this moment, he finally understood why the other party dared to be so insolent and unscrupulous. The Nahum family was one of the 3 Duke families in the Purple Moon Kingdom, and there was no need to doubt their strength. 300 years ago, this family had produced a king-level warrior. After such a long time, this king-level warrior should have passed away, but it was not difficult to see how terrifying this family was. Compared to the Marquis family, the foundation of the Duke family was a level higher. There was no guarantee that they would have king-level warriors, but they definitely had wild blood warriors. With this kind of strength and background, it was no wonder that they dared to be so unscrupulous. If they could not buy it by force, they would snatch it, not caring about the background of the other party. "We've really been targeted by an incredible existence." Gray took a deep breath, his face solemn. The other party's strength was beyond his expectations, and he could not help but feel a great deal of pressure. "This matter is only known to the few of us. Don't spread it." After a long time, Gray calmed himself down and spoke. "We understand." Hobbs, Alice, and the young man who inquired about the news all nodded solemnly. If this matter was known by the other members of the Red Wing, it would definitely cause panic. The team continued their journey without entering the city. A few days later, after entering the Sydney territory, Gray and a few others who knew the situation were completely relieved. They found a city and stayed in a tavern. They had been on the road for a long time, and they had been sleeping in the wilderness every day. Everyone was exhausted and needed to take a good rest. At least the strength of a desolate level to be able to barely protect myself. In the hotel room, Gray subconsciously tapped his fingers on the coffee table next to him, lost in thought. The other party's strength had indeed given him a lot of pressure. If he wanted to have some resistance in front of the other party, he had to at least have the strength of a desolate level. After all, for such a family, it was inevitable that they would have wild blood warriors. After swallowing the corpse hare ape's blood, I should be able to control 4 barbaric level blood fiends or 1 desolate level blood fiend. For Gray, it was both difficult and easy for him to possess the combat strength of a desolate level being. It was easy because after swallowing the corpse hare ape's blood, if he guessed correctly, he would be able to control a desolate level blood fiend at most. If he could find a suitable desolate level blood fiend to control, he would immediately have the combat strength of a desolate level blood fiend. It was difficult because it was extraordinarily difficult to obtain a desolate level blood fiend. For a desolate level blood fiend to have the ability to hunt, it had to be at least a wild blood warrior. Gray did not know such a being at all. The only one he knew was the Sydney family's copperback dragon. However, it was extremely difficult to persuade the Sydney family to use the copperback dragon to hunt a desolate-level blood fiend for him. Other than that, if I can increase my strength to that of a barbaric blood warrior as soon as possible, I might be able to have the combat strength of a wild blood warrior with the combination of wind and ice abilities. Currently, Gray's strength had yet to reach the level of a barbaric blood warrior, but with the combination of wind and ice abilities, he already had the combat strength of a barbaric blood warrior. When Gray's strength reached the level of a barbaric blood warrior, he might be able to use the combination of his abilities to cross a level and be comparable to a wild blood warrior. However, with my current cultivation speed, it will take at least half a year to reach the level of a barbaric blood warrior. Gray's current cultivation speed was already extremely fast. If he wanted to increase his strength, he would have to obtain some precious magic herbs that could increase his strength. Although these herbs were not as precious as the evolution fruit, which even king-level experts would fight over, they were still extremely rare and difficult to come across. In order to obtain this item, I've gotten into a lot of trouble. Taking out the silver metal ball from the rune portal bag, Gray couldn't help but focus his eyes on it. The silver metal ball, which was the size of a ping-pong ball, shone under the sunlight that shone into the room. It emitted a misty glow and looked extremely beautiful. It was extremely light, even lighter than ordinary wood. Holding it in his hand, he even worried that it would be blown away by a gust of wind. Grim clenched his hand into a fist and squeezed it with all his strength. With his current strength, even a solid titanium alloy ball would be flattened by him. However, when he squeezed this silver metal ball, there was no change at all. Grim opened his hand and looked at it. Not only was the silver metal ball not flattened, there was not even the slightest trace of deformation left on its surface. This kind of thing was simply beyond common sense. However, when he thought about how this kind of thing was needed by a strong person like the spirit merchant, he felt relieved. Gray did not know how strong the spirit merchant was, but he was sure that the other party's strength should be beyond king level. Not only because the other party had existed since the time of the Empire and was now at least 1,000 years old, but also because of the ability to completely drag a large area into an illusion when the other party appeared. That kind of method was simply unimaginable. Buzz! Suddenly, a strange and inexplicable feeling attacked Gray's heart. In an instant, Gray had a feeling of space-time disorder, and his head was heavy. The outside world was silent. Suddenly, he was separated from the noisy world. This feeling, Gray's expression changed. He had experienced this feeling before. That was the last time when he was dragged into the phantom world by the spirit merchant. He walked to the window and saw that on the street, there were figures walking back and forth, and carriages shuttling back and forth. However, there was no sound at all. It was as if everyone had turned into silent ghosts. The spirit merchant has appeared. He was almost certain that this was definitely the work of the spirit merchant, because it was almost exactly the same as the last time the other party appeared. He walked out of the room and saw Alice in the corridor. She was walking towards his room and seemed to be looking for him. He brushed past her, but she did not notice at all. He walked out of the hotel and walked on the street where people were moving back and forth, but there was no sound at all. After walking for a long time, what he saw was still this silent environment. It can't be that the entire city has been dragged into the mirage world, right? Chapter 3:12. It was in the afternoon, and the streets were crowded with pedestrians and carriages. Vendors and stalls could be seen everywhere, but walking on such a street, Gray felt a chill from the soles of his feet to his body. Because all of this seemed to be very close to Gray, but in fact it was very far away. Not a single sound could reach Gray's ears. People who seemed to be very close to him seemed to be thousands of miles away, and he could not hear a single sound coming from their mouths. It was not just sound. These people did not even have a physical body, nor did they notice Gray. They passed by Gray's side, or Gray's front, without a physical body at all. Gray had been walking in the city for a long time, but all he saw and encountered were such illusions. Gray could not help but suspect that the other party had dragged the entire city into this illusory world. After walking a few more streets, all he saw were the same illusions. Gray was completely sure of his previous guess. The other party had definitely pulled the entire city into an illusion. Terrifying, so powerful that it was terrifying. Gray was sure that no matter if it was the king of mercenaries or the king of assassins, these two king-level experts that Gray had seen, they would not be a match for the other party. Trapped in such an illusion, even if one's strength was heaven-defying and could destroy everything within a radius of thousands of meters, it would be useless. As long as one could not break the illusion, it would be useless no matter what one did. After walking a few more streets, a simple stall with an old man next to it appeared in front of Gray. Pa pa pa. Seeing the old man in front of the stall, Gray subconsciously took a few steps back. This was an extremely ordinary-looking old man. Regardless of whether it was his clothes or his appearance, he was extremely ordinary. He was no different from the many old vendors on the street. But within his ordinariness, there was something extraordinary. The other party's eyes were pitch black, like a bottomless abyss, as if they wanted to suck in one's mind. It was extremely frightening. The ghost merchant. This person was the ghost merchant. Having experienced it once, Gray naturally knew that the person in front of him was the extremely mysterious ghost merchant. My lord. Taking a deep breath and stabilizing his mind, Gray braced himself and walked forward, greeting respectfully. The old man nodded at him and said, "You can choose any one of these 3 items." Without any superfluous words, the old man said mechanically. Gray looked over and saw 3 items floating in front of the old man's stall. The first item was a 2-handed sword that was 5 feet long. The body of the sword was green, as if it was polished from green jade. There were complicated and beautiful patterns carved on it. Rather than calling it a sword, it would be better to call it an exquisite piece of art. If it was placed in the hall of the castle, it would definitely not stand out. However, Gray didn't dare to underestimate this sword. It wasn't only because the one who took out this sword was the ghost merchant, but also because when he saw this sword, he actually felt a chill down his spine and an extremely dangerous feeling. Clearly, this sword was not as simple as it looked. It was definitely an extremely terrifying magic weapon. The second item was a floating flower. It looked as if it had just been picked, delicate and beautiful. The flower had a total of 7 petals. Each petal was the size of an adult's middle finger and had different colors. There were red, green, blue. The 7 petals had 7 different colors. When the 7 colors were combined together, it was filled with a dreamy color, giving people a feeling that it didn't really exist. Rainbow flower. Gray's pupils suddenly shrank. He recognized this flower. After learning that in addition to the conventional method of upgrading bloodlines by implanting a higher Gray bloodline, there was also a method of combining blood techniques with some special magic herbs. Gray had read many related books. For this reason, he had even made a trip to the Sidney family. With the help of the huge collection of books in the Sidney family, he finally had some understanding in this area. Among them, the rainbow flower was a magic herb that could be combined with blood techniques to promote the evolution and upgrade of bloodlines. In terms of value, it was comparable to the evolution fruit that the king of mercenaries and the king of assassins fought over. In other words, the flower in front of him was something that even a king-level powerhouse would definitely be jealous of. Even magic herbs with similar effects to the evolution fruit can be exchanged. No wonder it could attract the attention of the Nahum family's brothers. Gray sucked in a breath of cold air. He finally understood why the Nahum family's brothers would force a trade, and why they would rob and kill if they couldn't force a deal. He had underestimated the value of the silver metal ball. It could actually be exchanged for something that even a king-level powerhouse coveted. As expected, the Nahum family will definitely not let this go. A deep sense of danger attacked Gray's heart. Intuition told him that even if he left the Duke's territory, it did not mean that he was absolutely safe. The Nahum family would definitely try to find him. Forcefully suppressing the worry in his heart, Gray looked at the third item. It was a purple ring. The whole body was made of an unknown purple metal, carved with many complicated patterns. It was simple and full of rhythm. It looked extremely ordinary, but within the ordinariness, there was a faint sense of extraordinariness. It was full of a mysterious charm. Moreover, to be able to be placed together with a powerful magic sword and a magic herb comparable to the evolution fruit. It was enough to show that it was not ordinary. Of the 3 items, apart from the magic ring, whose specific value could not be determined for the time being, the value of the other 2 items was extremely high. For a moment, he did not know how to choose. "Sir, can I trouble you to introduce the 3 items?" Gray glanced at the old man and asked politely. Last time, he had also asked the old man about the 3 items. Although the old man's answer was very perfunctory, he did not seem to be angry, so Gray dared to ask. Magic weapon, plant ability. Rainbow flower, purifying herbs. The old man started with the green magic sword and introduced it from left to right. The old man's voice was gentle, and the content was extremely brief, exactly the same as the introduction from last time. He was definitely not a qualified businessman. Of course, for such a strong person, no one dared to ask him to be a qualified businessman, not even a king-level powerhouse. The old man's introduction continued, only to see him calmly point to the last item, which was the purple metal ring. Magic weapon, space ability. Space ability? Glenn's eyes suddenly widened, and a burst of light burst out from his eyes. He stared at the purple ring without blinking. This was actually a ring with space ability. Space ability was an extremely rare ability, but any magic item that had this kind of ability was bound to have an extremely high value. Among them, the most common magic item that had space ability was the rune space bag. But even if it was the most common, very few people could have it. So far, Gray knew that those who had rune space bags were either savage blood warriors, such as the Shadow Serpent's leader Rob Tracy, or from families of Marquis or above, such as the City family. It could be seen that this kind of item was precious, and the item in front of him was obviously not a rune space bag. Then what ability did it have? Teleportation, spatial blade, or some other spatial ability? No matter which one it was, it must be very heaven-defying. After all, space ability was such an ability. These 3 items, which one should I choose? Staring at the 3 items, Gray fell into a dilemma. Among the 3 items, Gray gave up on the rainbow flower after careful consideration. For him, upgrading bloodline was far from as difficult as it was for others, and it was not worthwhile to use the rainbow flower to upgrade bloodline. Even if his strength reached the king level, he still had a way to upgrade bloodline above the king level. Although the rainbow flower was also a way to upgrade bloodline above the king level, just one flower was obviously not enough, and it was a bit of a chicken rib for him. The remaining 2 items, the plant ability magic sword, could be said to be very suitable for him. He himself had plant ability, and with the plant ability magic sword in hand, the power that could be exerted would definitely be extremely strong. Now that he was in need of strength, this magic sword that could enhance strength was definitely an excellent choice. As for the other item, it was actually an extremely rare magic weapon with spatial ability. Although it was not clear what kind of space ability it was, there is no doubt that this was definitely an extremely valuable magic weapon, and the space ability had already shown its value. Which one should I choose between the plant ability magic sword and the space ability magic ring? After excluding the rainbow flower, Gray fell into a dilemma of choosing one of the 2. Although he wanted to choose both items, it was obvious that he only had the right to choose one item. He did not think of bargaining with the ghost merchant. Without the corresponding strength, it was absolutely foolish to bargain with such a powerhouse. After hesitating for a moment, Gray gritted his teeth and made a decision. I choose the ring with the space ability. Space ability was an extremely rare ability, and every item with such an ability was extremely precious. In the end, Gray still chose the ring with the space ability. The moment Gray made his choice, an item fell into the palm of Gray's hand. It was the purple metal ring. Then Gray saw the old man and the stall in front of him, as well as the remaining 2 items on the stall, become blurry and slowly disappear. The noise that had disappeared in the surroundings slowly returned and became clear. In the blink of an eye, Gray returned to the original world. I haven't given him the silver metal ball yet. Suddenly, Gray's expression became strange. Because he was too nervous, he actually forgot to take out the silver metal ball. The silver metal ball was still in his rune space bag, and he had not had time to give it to the other party. Chapter 3:13. Gray hurriedly took out the rune space bag and looked inside. In the next moment, the expression on his face suddenly turned cold. The silver metal ball that should have been lying in the rune space bag had disappeared without a trace. To be able to take something out of the rune space bag without a sound, nothing was missing from the rune space bag, but the silver metal ball was missing. It went without saying what this meant. The ghost merchant must have taken the silver metal ball away when the transaction was completed. As the owner of the rune space bag, he did not notice at all. He could not help but feel a chill run down his spine. Is the blood technique that the other party cultivates a space-type ability? Taking things out of the rune space bag without anyone noticing and creating an illusion that covered an entire city were very similar to space-type abilities. Gray could not help but suspect that the other party's blood technique was of the space type. Space-type blood technique. I'm afraid that even the royal families of the Four Kingdoms don't have it. I didn't expect the ghost merchant to cultivate this type of blood technique. No wonder he's been alive for at least 1,000 years. Space-type blood techniques were definitely powerful. To be able to cultivate such a powerful blood technique and live for 1,000 years meant that he was above the king level. Just thinking about it made one feel that his strength was terrifying. "Young master, please move aside. You're blocking the way." A voice called Gray back to reality. Gray looked around and found himself standing in the middle of a street, surrounded by people shuttling back and forth. A carriage wanted to pass through the street, but was blocked by Gray. The coachman wanted to scold Gray, but after seeing what Gray was wearing, he immediately changed his tone and spoke politely. "I'm sorry." Gray apologized and quickly walked to the side, heading in the direction of the tavern. When he returned to the tavern, Alice greeted Gray. "Young Master Gray, where did you go? I went to your room to look for you, but I couldn't find you. I walked around the streets. What's the matter?" Gray asked, nodding to the other party. He had seen the other party looking for him in his room. Unfortunately, he had been dragged into the shadow world at that time. Even if he had brushed past the other party had not noticed at all. "It's like this. We've gained quite a lot this time, so we'd like to take a trip to Sydney City to sell the furs and blood we got this time." Following Gray, the Red Wing gained a lot from this trip. Ordinary fur merchants would not be able to afford it, and they could only sell it in Sydney City. As the largest city in the Sydney Marquisdom, there were many branches opened by large merchant guilds. Even the Rex Merchant Guild, which had the backing of the King of Mercenaries, had opened a branch in the Sydney Marquisdom. "Sure." Gray nodded in agreement. Gray also had many things that he needed to sell, and their value far exceeded that of the Red Wing. He could only sell them in Sydney City. Alice's suggestion to go to Sydney City coincided with his idea. After returning to his room and locking the door, Gray took out the purple ring he had exchanged with the ghost merchant and looked at it carefully. The purple ring was made of an unknown purple metal. It was a little simple, but it did not lose its beauty. It had a clean and charming beauty. "I wonder what kind of ability it has." Gray was about to infuse a trace of blood energy into the ring, but the next moment he stopped. This was a tavern room, and it was not suitable to check out magic items with unknown abilities. If a spatial blade was created, the whole tavern would be destroyed. Even if it was not a spatial blade, it would cause a big commotion and it would be extremely bad. In the end, Gray resisted the urge to check it out now. He planned to check it out the next day after leaving the city. The next day, Gray and the Red Wing left the city and set off for Sydney City. At noon, temporarily stopping to prepare lunch, Gray walked into the woods on the side of the road. He only stopped when he was a few miles away from the tavern. Gray took out the purple ring from the rune portal bag and put it on the middle finger of his left hand. He tried to channel a trace of blood energy into the ring. With the injection of blood energy, Gray's consciousness suddenly appeared in a huge space. The huge space was extremely empty. There was nothing, no light, but it did not seem dark. Instead, there was a little bit of white light. What huge space! It is dozens of times larger than my current rune portal bag. The volume is probably tens of thousands of cubic meters. Is this a space ring more advanced than a rune portal bag? Withdrawing his blood energy, Gray frowned slightly. A space that was dozens of times larger than the rune portal bag in his hand was naturally very precious, but it was not what he urgently needed now. For now, a rune portal bag of 1,000 cubic meters was enough for him. He did not need a larger space ring at all. With the threat of the Serum family, he wanted to obtain a magic weapon with other space abilities as a means of self-protection. For example, space blades, creating phantom worlds, teleportation, and so on. But now, what appeared in front of him was still a space tool that could only be used to store things. This made him very disappointed. Is it really just a space ring? Taking off the purple metal ring, Gray held it in front of his eyes and looked at it while turning it. There were many beautiful lines on the purple metal ring. Simple and unsophisticated. Complicated. Beautiful. Suddenly, Gray murmured softly. After careful observation, Gray found that the complicated patterns on the purple ring seemed to be a whole, but in fact the center was divided into two parts, the left and the right. Two patterns, could it be two types of abilities? Gray narrowed his eyes and directed his blood energy toward one of the patterns. Suddenly, his consciousness appeared in the huge space again. Withdrawing his blood energy, Gray looked at the other pattern and directed his blood energy toward it. Whoosh! The moment Gray poured in his blood energy, a strange scene appeared. In the forest, a huge formation of 5 to 6 meters appeared and floated in the air. The outside of the formation was a circle, and there were many complicated lines inside. Near the complicated lines, there were many mysterious lines. They were densely packed and filled with a mysterious aura. What is this thing? Gray retreated quickly and finally retreated dozens of meters away to watch the subsequent changes from afar. The color of the mysterious array slowly changed from translucent to purple. In the end, it turned into a bewitching purple color, emitting a purple light and emitting a strange aura. Then, the formation seemed to have a mass. It floated like a goose feather and slowly fell from the sky. Finally, it landed on the ground full of withered leaves. Chi! As if it was branded on the flesh, there was a sound of burning flesh. The withered leaves were burned and disappeared. Then, the ground caved in slightly, and a purple formation was branded on it. Gray watched from afar without blinking. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes. After a few minutes, there was still no change to the formation branded on the ground. That's it. Gray's originally expectant and curious expression abruptly turned strange. A formation appeared out of thin air, and a formation was drawn on the ground. Then, there was no more. All the changes had disappeared. What kind of spatial ability is this? Or, what kind of ability is this? Gray's expression was strange. No matter how he looked at it, it didn't seem like the spatial ability that Gray understood. This was not the teleportation, phantom space, or space blade that Gray expected. He could not help but look at the purple ring in his hand again. He poured his blood energy into the pattern on the ring again. It's not enough. Why did it absorb so much this time? Originally, Gray thought that just a little would be enough. After all, it had been like this before. However, this time, the pattern seemed to be insatiable. No matter how much blood power Gray injected into it, it did not feel like it was full at all. I'd like to see how much blood energy you can swallow. Gray did not believe in heresy and continued to pour his blood energy into it. He would not be satisfied if he did not figure out what kind of ability this was. More and more blood energy was injected, but the pattern on the purple metal ring still did not change. Very quickly, Gray had already infused half of his blood power. With his current strength as a berserker, half of his blood energy was definitely a lot, but there was still no change. He injected it again. Soon, more than half of his blood energy had been injected, but there was still no change. He continued to inject, and his blood energy was almost exhausted. Whoosh! Finally, the purple ring in his hand changed. The patterns that were injected with blood energy suddenly emitted a purple light. Whoosh! The next moment, Gray had a strange feeling of space-time disorder in his mind. It was as if someone had suddenly hammered him, and his head became a little dizzy. He had already experienced this feeling twice before. The first time was when he encountered the ghost merchant and was pulled into the phantom world. The second time was also, how did I suddenly appear here? He looked around and sized up his feet. The expression on his face became startled. Under his feet, the purple formation was clearly visible. Originally, he should have been dozens of meters away from this formation, but in the next moment of space-time disorder, he actually crossed the distance of dozens of meters and appeared in this formation. Teleportation. In that instant, he had teleported from dozens of meters away to the formation. Gray's eyes suddenly became extremely blazing. No, instead of calling it teleportation, it's better to call it teleportation. The second ability of this ring should be teleportation. It can teleport the user to a place where the formation pattern is imprinted. Chapter 3:14. Teleportation allowed one to travel from one place to another in the blink of an eye. There was no need to set coordinates during the process, or rather, the coordinates were determined by sight. However, what he had encountered just now was obviously inconsistent with teleportation. First of all, the travel just now required coordinates or markings, and the purple formation pattern was one of them. Secondly, the travel just now took a lot of time, and it was not completed in a blink of an eye. Therefore, Gray judged that the ability just now was not teleportation, but teleportation. It's teleportation, not teleportation. Gray was not disappointed at all when he judged that it was teleportation instead of teleportation. Although teleportation could be completed in a blink of an eye, the distance was usually quite short and could only be reached within sight. However, teleportation was different. Teleportation was usually quite far away and could easily reach hundreds of miles away. It was definitely the most suitable for escaping. Now that he was facing the threat of the Nahum family, the teleportation ability was definitely more practical than teleportation. Just traveling within sight might not be able to escape the Nahum family's pursuit, but if he could travel hundreds of miles in an instant, he would definitely be able to escape. The only problem is that it takes a lot of time to infuse the power of blood before teleportation. Gray wanted to check again to see if he could avoid spending too much time infusing the power of blood. Unfortunately, he had almost no power of blood left, so he could only give up. A few days later, Gray and the Red Wing arrived at Sydney City. During these few days, Gray checked the purple ring as soon as his power of blood recovered. He had a clearer understanding of the purple ring's teleportation ability. It was not unavoidable to spend a long time infusing the power of blood. He only needed to infuse the power of blood in advance and store it in the ring. At the critical moment, a trace of the power of blood would be activated, and it would be enough to teleport away. In addition, teleportation was not limited to him alone. He could also teleport away anything he touched within a few meters of him. This was the conclusion he had obtained from testing the iron-armed barbarian ape. He also had a rough understanding of the longest teleportation distance, 1,000 miles. Its maximum teleportation distance was 1,000 miles. Beyond this distance, Gray would not be able to sense the set purple coordinates and would not be able to complete the teleportation. Only within this range could Gray perform the teleportation. Moreover, teleportation coordinates were not limited to one. Within 1,000 miles, multiple coordinates could be set. When teleporting, one could choose one of the many coordinates to teleport to. Without a doubt, this was a very powerful restriction. After figuring out the ring's ability, Gray couldn't help but be glad that he had chosen this ring. Not only did he obtain a huge space, but he also obtained the best method to escape. In comparison, the plant-based magical sword might be able to increase his combat strength by a level, but it was not of much help to him. It wasn't as if he didn't have any means of fighting above his level. The combination of the wind and ice element, as well as the ability to control corpses, were all such abilities. Having one more wasn't much. It would be helpful, but it was far less useful than the spatial ring. After entering Sydney City, Gray and the Red Wing first found a tavern. Then, they went to the few large chambers of commerce in Sydney City. Only the large chambers of commerce could buy the things in their hands. In the end, They chose to open a branch of the Lex Chamber of Commerce in Sydney City. As a Chamber of Commerce with the backing of a king-level master, even if it was just a branch, it was obviously not ordinary. It would definitely not be a problem to buy the things in their hands. In fact, this was also the case. In the Lex Chamber of Commerce, the Red Wing and Gray had successfully sold the goods in their hands. Gray kept some of the blood of the barbarian-level blood fiends for the Fergus family to use for their training. Even so, they had earned a total of more than 3 million gold coins. The Red Wing, on the other hand, had earned more than 200,000 gold coins. A profit of more than 200,000 gold coins made the Red Wing very excited. Even when the old chief was still around, it was impossible to have such a huge profit in one go. Of course, they also knew that the reason for such a huge profit was all because of Gray. In fact, the total amount of blood fiends that they had hunted was only about 10,000 gold coins. The rest were all prey that Gray did not want. Is there anything else that you need? The person who received Gray in the Red Wing was a middle-aged woman. Her expression was full of enthusiasm. She was the branch manager of this branch and was from a side branch of the Lex family. Gray and the Red Wing's mercenary group had sold more than 3 million taels of blood and fur from the blood beasts. This caused the funds of this branch of the Chamber of Commerce to be slightly tight, but she was not worried at all. Items related to blood fiends had always been the hottest seller. There was no need to worry about not being able to sell them. Moreover, even if they could not sell them in this branch, they could send them to other branches or the main store. There was no need to worry about not being able to sell them. Do you have any channels to obtain the blood of the wild-level blood fiends? Gray asked. If there were no accidents, he would be able to reach the barbarian level in about half a year. The relevant items should have been prepared. Among them, the Wild Wolf was the wild-level blood fiend corresponding to the Wind Wolf sequence. In order to practice the corresponding blood technique, the blood of the Wild Wolf must be implanted. However, the Wild Wolf was a wild-level blood fiend. Even if it was just an ordinary wild-level blood fiend, there were very few forces and families that had the ability to hunt it down. It was very difficult to find the blood essence of the Wild Wolf. Fortunately, he had the ability to transform and did not need the blood essence of the Wild Wolf. He only needed the blood of the Wild Wolf to implant it, so the difficulty was much lower. Even so, it was not easy to find it. He could only see if he could think of a solution from the giant Chamber of Commerce, the Lex's Chamber of Commerce. The blood of the Wild Wolf. The middle-aged woman looked troubled. Our main store once auctioned the blood of this type of blood fiend. I don't know if there are any left. We only auction the blood of this type of blood fiend and do not sell it to the public. I am willing to buy it at twice the auction price. Please help me ask. Gray said, twice the price. The middle-aged woman was slightly tempted. Why auction the blood of the Wild Wolf instead of selling it directly? Wasn't it to maximize the benefits? They wanted to sell it at the highest price through bidding. Now that the other party was willing to buy it at twice the auction price, it was definitely a very worthwhile deal. Yes, Gray nodded. I can help you ask the main store, but even if there are any left, I don't think there will be much left, the middle-aged woman said. It's okay. I don't need too much. 10 portions are enough. If it's not enough, I'll buy as many as you have. Gray said. After paying a deposit of 1 million, Gray left the Lex's Chamber of Commerce. After bidding farewell to the Red Wing members, Gray went to Sydney Castle. Since he had already arrived in Sydney City, he naturally had to pay a visit. As a young wild blood warrior, Gray was naturally very valued. Marquis Sydney personally received him and then asked Gray and Polly to accompany him. It's rare for me to come here. I have to stay for a few more days. Zero was wearing a noble's white robe with blue edges. He was full of heroic spirit. Yes, if possible, please stay for a few more days. Polly also smiled. Her facial features were exquisite, and her blonde hair was extremely soft. Her skin was so fair that it looked like it was carved from jade. Her smile was beautiful and did not lose the elegance of a noble lady. After knowing that your strength has reached the wild blood warrior level, Big Brother has been cultivating hard. This time, his strength has reached the wild blood warrior level, so he probably wants to spar with you. Congratulations. Gray smiled and said to Zero, "You've exposed me." Zero pretended to be angry and glared at Polly. They chatted for a while, and Gray changed the topic to the big families of the Purple Moon Kingdom. He wanted to know the strength of each family, especially the strength of the Nahum family. After all, this time, he would definitely become enemies with his family. From Polly's words, Gray learned that the Nahum family currently had 2 wild blood warriors that were known to outsiders. It was even very likely that there was a hidden wild blood warrior, which made him feel even more pressured. Fortunately, the spatial ability Ring had the ability to teleport. Even in the worst-case scenario, he could teleport the Fergus family and escape. This made him feel slightly relieved. The Kenneth, Neum, and Addison Dukes have all produced king-class warriors before. Their strength and background are extremely terrifying. If you want to say which of the 3 families is stronger, based on the current situation, it should be the Kenneth family, Zero said. Zero said, "The Kenneth family?" Gray looked at Zero doubtfully, not understanding the basis of his judgment. The Kenneth family should have king-class warriors alive. Zero's expression was solemn as he lowered his voice and said, "King-class warriors." Gray's eyes suddenly widened. The Kenneth family actually had a king-class warrior alive. This was really incredible news. Gray had seen the strength of a king-class warrior. It was absolutely terrifying. As long as they were willing, destroying a city would be a piece of cake. Indeed, the Kenneth family, which had a king-class warrior, was definitely stronger than the other 2 dukes. In the entire Purple Moon Kingdom, how many king-class warriors are there in total? Gray couldn't help but ask curiously. Even if we include those who haven't shown themselves for 100 or 200 years, there shouldn't be more than 10. Zero thought for a while and said, "What about the other 3 kingdoms? The Scarlet Kingdom, the Jewel Kingdom, and the Purple Moon Kingdom are the same. There shouldn't be more than 10 of them. As for the Flame Kingdom..." At this point, Zero's expression became slightly solemn. "It's certain that there are more than 10 of them, but I'm not sure exactly how many." More than 10? Gray sucked in a breath of cold air. The Kingdom of Raging Flames was indeed the leader of the 4 great kingdoms. They actually had so many king-level powerhouses. The Flame Kingdom was the kingdom that ranked first in terms of overall strength among the 4 kingdoms. It occupied the most abundant and prosperous piece of land in the center of the continent. There were many powerful warriors in the kingdom, and its overall strength was far beyond any of the other 3 kingdoms. This kingdom was also very aggressive and would start a war with other kingdoms almost every few years. The continent was still relatively balanced because the Purple Moon Kingdom, the Jewel Kingdom, and the Scarlet Kingdom had formed an offensive and defensive alliance to jointly resist the threat from the Flame Kingdom. Speaking of which, the Flame Moon Kingdom hasn't started a war for more than 10 years. The situation is a bit strange, as if they are plotting something. After chatting for a while, Zero suddenly said with a slightly solemn expression, "Be careful of the Wallen family." Chapter 315. Be careful of the Wallen family? Gray looked at Zeroyan in confusion, not understanding the meaning behind his sudden warning. According to the spies the family planted in the Wallen family seems to have been secretly mobilizing their manpower. They suspect that the Wallen family will make a big move. Although the Wallen family is likely to target the Sydney family, you still have to be careful. Zeroyan said in a low voice, "Rob Tracy died at your hands, causing the Wallen family to lose 2 powerful magic weapons. The Wallen family must be bearing a grudge. According to the spies, the Wallen family has investigated you." Investigated me? Gray's heart suddenly trembled, and he immediately became alert. Being investigated by the Sydney family's enemy, the Marquis family, was not a good thing. Fortunately, with his and the Fergus family's current strength, they were not completely defenseless against the Marquis family. His blood fiends were now comparable to those at the barbarian level, and he could control them. Earl Fergus could also control a barbarian-level blood fiend. With such strength, even if the other party sent out 2 barbarian blood warriors, they would still be able to put up a fight. However, Gray still decided to take the opportunity to inquire about the Wallen family's strength. How many barbarian blood warriors does the Wallen family actually have? Like the Sydney family, There are a total of 3. Zoroyan said. Apart from the barbarian blood warriors, what other resources does the Wallen family have? Gray continued to ask. A rune puppet at the desolation level. The Wallen family obtained this rune puppet from the ruins of an empire. Zoroyan glanced at Gray. But don't worry too much. This rune puppet is the same as the Sydney family's copperback dragon. It's not convenient to take it away. Its body is slightly larger than the copperback dragon, with a length of more than 10 meters. Even a rune space bag cannot contain it, so this rune puppet can only serve as a deterrent. Gray immediately understood Zoroyan's meaning. With such a large body, moving it would cause a huge commotion. It could not be used as a surprise attack. If it was used to attack the enemy would have received the news and hidden before it even arrived. Moreover, if the other party brazenly drove the rune puppet into the Sydney territory, the Sydney family would naturally not stand by and do nothing. This completely relieved Gray. Ignoring the threat of the rune puppet, the 3 barbarian blood warriors. Gray estimated that the 3 barbarian blood warriors would definitely not move together. The 2 of them moving together like last time should be the limit. Just like the Sydney family, the Whalen family would definitely have some places that required powerhouses to guard. Even moreover, he would soon be able to consume the corpse hair ape's blood. By then, he would be able to control 4 barbarian-level blood fiends. Even if the other party sent 3 barbarian-level blood fiends, they would not be able to gain an advantage. In comparison, the Nahum family's was a bigger threat. This was what he needed to be on guard against. Letting the Red Wing return to the Fergus family first, Gray stayed with the Sydney family for a few days before returning to the Fergus family. During these few days, Gray either exchanged pointers with Zoroyan or went to the Sydney family's library. He had gained a lot. After returning to the Fergus family, Gray handed the rune space bag and the corpse of a barbarian-level blood fiend to Earl Fergus and explained the origin of the spatial ability ring. He also told him about his conflict with the Nahum family. This was to prevent the Nahum family from attacking the Fergus family. In the blink of an eye, a month had passed. During this month, Gray stayed with the Fergus family to train. He did not go anywhere else. According to his estimation, even if the Nahum family attacked, they would not be too strong. With his strength, he should be able to withstand the first wave. When the time came, it would not be too late to use the spatial ability of the ring to hide. However, what he feared did not happen. The Nahum family did not come. This world was not like his previous world, where there was a recording ability. It was obviously difficult to find someone without knowing their name or appearance. Crash! In the training room, a 5-meter-long giant green wolf appeared on the surface of Gray's body. There were some mysterious black patterns on the surface of the giant green wolf's fur, giving it a mysterious aura. Its eyes were sharp and its aura was majestic. It was like the king of wolves, overlooking everything. After a long time, the giant green wolf disappeared and Gray's figure was revealed. He was wearing white clothes and had a head of slightly long black hair. His face was sharp and angular, as if it had been carved by a knife. He, who had just finished his cultivation, exuded a sharpness like a sword that had just been unsheathed. It wasn't until a moment later that the sharp sword-like aura gradually disappeared. However, it did not disappear. It was hidden in his body. When he fought, this sharp aura would burst out and give the enemy a strong psychological pressure. Although he could not kill someone with a glare, he could definitely frighten someone with average strength to the point that they would not be able to display their full strength. This was the embryonic form of a king-level powerhouse's aura. When it grew to the limit, it would transform into an aura that could truly kill the enemy. For a king-level powerhouse, just their aura alone was enough to kill. In front of their aura, those below a certain level would be useless no matter how many of them there were, because they could not even get close to the king-level powerhouse. It's time to swallow the corpse hair ape's blood. Gray moved his body and muttered to himself. It had been 5 months since the last time he swallowed blood. It was enough time for him to swallow the blood of a blood fiend again. He walked out of the training room and went straight to the bathroom. Soon, he soaked in a bathtub, took out the corpse hair ape's blood that he had already prepared, and drank it in one gulp. Suddenly, A hot stream exploded in his stomach. It was as if a volcano had erupted. Endless hot magma splashed and spread all over his body. Gray's body was like the earth that had been ravaged by magma. It was completely crimson and scorching hot everywhere. Inside Gray's body, the most essential thing, his bloodline, was being roasted. It was like fine iron being hammered by a hammer, rapidly changing. This was an extremely mysterious change from simple to complex. It was like a simple drawing, but now lines were constantly being added, making it complicated. The evolution of the bloodline was a process of going from simple to complicated. After a long time, Gray woke up. After leaving the bathroom, Gray went through the basement of the castle and arrived at a forest near the Fergus family. Thump, 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 thump. For loud noises were heard as 4 gigantic creatures appeared in the middle of the forest. Immediately, many trees were crushed by them. One of them was a huge ape-type blood fiend. It was the iron-armed barbarian ape. The other one was a green-colored ghost blade mantis with a pair of huge scythes. The last one was a huge, streamlined, and 5-meter-long brood ant with a black iron carapace. The last one was a mountain-like tusked boar with long black hair. Gray walked to the other 3 blood fiends and began to control them one by one. Immediately, the other 3 blood fiends began to react. The ghost blade mantis lifted its huge scythes. A tree that required a few people to wrap their arms around, it was scraped by the scythes. Immediately, the tree broke with a loud bang from where it was scraped. The incision was smooth. The brood ant's crawling body also propped itself up. It wasn't the biggest among the 4 blood fiends, but it was the strongest. Just by leaning to the side, the tree next to it immediately broke and collapsed. The tusked boar took a few steps forward. Immediately, a loud, earthquake-like sound was heard. It was as if a mountain was moving. In terms of body size, it was definitely the biggest. Sure enough, there are 4 of them. Gray killed a wild beast and tried to control again. In the end, one of the barbaric-level blood fiends collapsed powerlessly and completely lost control. Obviously, it was just as he had guessed. The corpse control ability he obtained from the corpse hair ape could only control 4 barbaric-level blood fiends at most. After regaining control of the barbaric-level blood fiend, Gray stared at the 4 barbaric-level blood fiends and nodded in satisfaction. With these 4 barbaric-level blood fiends, his combat strength had increased by several folds. He didn't have to worry about the Wallen family anymore. He wasn't afraid of the 3 barbaric blood warriors of the Wallen family attacking together. Even if it was the Nahum family, he couldn't help but feel a little more confident. Even if the other party sent a desolate blood warrior, the 4 barbaric-level blood fiends would be enough to delay them for a period of time, giving him a chance to use his teleportation ability to escape. It would be even better if I could get my hands on a desolate-level blood fiend. If he could get his hands on a desolate-level blood fiend, he would immediately possess the combat strength of a desolate level. With this combat strength, it would be enough to deter the Nahum family and make the Nahum family not dare to act rashly. If a desolate-level combatant could not be killed and was allowed to escape, then other than the 2 desolate blood warriors, no one else in the Naim family would be a match for him. One could imagine what the consequences would be. Rob Tracy was a good example. Because they couldn't kill him during the encirclement, the Sydney territory suffered heavy losses, and everyone was in danger. Therefore, once he attained the combat strength of a desolate blood warrior, he should be able to deter the other party and make them not dare to act rashly. Unless the other party had absolute confidence in killing him and not allowing him to escape. "Father, are you looking for me?" As soon as Gray returned to the castle, a servant informed Earl Fergus that he should go to the study. Gray pushed open the door of the study and walked in. After entering, his expression couldn't help but change. Earl Fergus and Bernal were both in the study, but their expressions were grave and even a little pale. He had a bad premonition. "What's wrong?" Gray asked gravely. "Could it be that the Nahum family has come looking for us?" Earl Fergus shook his head slightly, but the grave expression on his face didn't lessen. Gray couldn't help but frown. If it wasn't the Nahum family that had come looking for them, then what else could have caused their expressions to turn so ugly? "What's going on?" Earl Fergus asked with a grave expression on his face. The Sidney family has been destroyed. Chapter 3:16. What? Gray thought he had misheard and looked at Earl Fergus in shock. News came from Sydney City. Sydney Castle was attacked by a strong enemy last night, and no one from the Sidney family survived. Bernal said with a pale face. How could it be? Gray was dumbfounded. His eyes were filled with shock and disbelief. What kind of family was the Sidney family? Even among the Marquis family, they were one of the top families. The family had the bronze-backed dragon, a desolate-level special blood beast, as its foundation. Even if it was attacked by a desolate blood warrior, it should not have been able to do anything. It was hard to believe that such a family had been wiped out. Do you know which force did it? Gray asked hurriedly. I don't know. Earl Fergus shook his head with a grave expression. When the city guards of Sydney City heard the commotion and rushed over, the Sidney family had already been wiped out. Which force did it? Was it the Wallen family? Boynell's expression changed again and again as he guessed. It can't be the Wallen family. The Wallen family doesn't have that kind of power. Gray shook his head with a grave expression. Gray, who had previously inquired about the Wallen family's power, knew very well that the Wallen family did not have that kind of power. To wipe out the Sidney family with the bronze-backed dragon, it would take at least 2 desolate blood warriors to be able to do it. At best, the Wallen family only had a rune puppet with power comparable to a desolate blood warrior, and it was not convenient to take it away. It was impossible to wipe out the Sidney family with this kind of power. If it's not the Wallen family, then what family is it? Other families? Which family has such a big grudge against the Sidney family? Bernal said with a grave expression. There are not many forces in the entire Purple Moon Kingdom that can wipe out the Sidney family. Earl Fergus said with a grave expression. Among the aristocratic families, only the 3 dukes and the royal family have this ability. Among the non-aristocratic families, only the Lex family has this ability. The royal family can be ruled out. The royal family would never destroy the Marquis family for no reason. Even if they wanted to destroy the Marquis family, they would not do it secretly. So, the most likely suspects are the 3 dukes family and the Lex family. The 3rd duke's family and the Lex family. Bernal's expression was solemn. Regardless of whether it was the 3 dukes families or the Lex family, any one of them was a colossal force. They either had a king-level combatant or had produced one in the past. But I've never heard of the Sidney family being hostile to these 4 forces. Gray furrowed his brows. Even though the 3 dukes families and the Lex family had the power to destroy the Sidney family, there had never been any news of the Sidney family having a bad relationship with the 4 families. There had never been any news of this before. On the other hand, the Fergus family had a conflict with the Nahum family of the 3 dukes families, although it was very likely that the other party had not found out about the Fergus family. Let's not talk about which force destroyed the Sidney family for now. Right now, we and the other nobles of the Sidney family are in a very bad situation. Bornell's expression was worried. The Sidney family has been destroyed. Nobles like us who were in theft by the Sidney family will most likely lose our noble status and territory. According to the kingdom's aristocratic laws, if a high-ranking noble lost their title or was destroyed, the nobles in theft by the high-ranking noble would have their territory taken back. Now that the Sidney family had been destroyed, the nobles in theft by the Sidney family would naturally have their territory taken back by the royal family. The Sidney family has several branches outside, so there should be no need to worry about the succession of the title. Count Fergus shook his head slightly. The Sidney family had hundreds of years of history, and the family had already split into several branches. Although the main branch had been wiped out, there were still a few branches. There shouldn't be any problems with inheriting the title. If the other party is determined to destroy the Sidney family, the situation of the other branches will probably be very bad. Gray said in a deep voice. Asterisk pa. 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 Asterisk at this moment, a series of hurried footsteps approached, followed by the voice of steward Nick outside the door. My lord, there's urgent news. Gray and the other two's expressions changed. Bernal hurried to the door and opened it, taking a bamboo tube that was as thick as a thumb from steward Nick. He opened the bamboo tube, took out a slip of paper, and opened it to read its contents. In the next moment, Bornell's expression suddenly became extremely unsightly. Gray and Earl Fergus did not look at him, and he hurriedly said, "The main branch of the Sidney family has been destroyed. A branch of the Sidney family has also been destroyed. It happened last night, almost at the same time as the Sidney family. This is to completely destroy the Sidney family." Earl Fergus's expression was ashen. There was no doubt that the other party had come with the intention of destroying the Sidney family from the start, regardless of whether it was the main branch or the branch. Soon after, more urgent news arrived. After reading the urgent news, Gray and the other two's expressions became more and more unsightly, and in the end, their faces were as heavy as water. The main branches of the Sidney family had all been destroyed at the same time. "It's over. The Sidney family is completely finished," Bernal said dejectedly. "We nobles who were infected by the Sidney family will also lose our lands and noble status." Earl Fergus did not say a word. After generations of hard work and sacrifices, they had finally obtained the title of Earl. But less than a year after becoming an Earl, they had been beaten back to their original state in an instant, and were about to lose their noble status and lands. Gray was also silent. It was hard to imagine that the Marquis family, which could be ranked among the top, would be destroyed overnight. He thought of the handsome Zeloyan, and he thought of Polly, who was both beautiful and quiet. These two people were one of the few friends he had a good relationship with. It seemed like yesterday that he had sparred and chatted with them in Sidney Castle, but it would never happen again. After a long while, Count Fergus sighed softly and glanced at Gray and Bernard before saying, "Don't worry. The Fergus family probably won't be able to keep their noble status. We have to make plans early. Do you have any ideas about where the Fergus family should go in the future? With the Fergus family's current strength, we can switch to another noble family. It shouldn't be a problem for us to obtain a noble title in the future," Bernal said thoughtfully. "Switch to another noble family? Even if we can obtain a noble title, it won't be too high, and it will be easy for us to be wary and suspicious." Gray shook his head. He was not optimistic about Bernal's suggestion. The main reason why the Fergus family was valued by the Sidney family was that the Fergus family had been rooted in the Sidney Hill for many years. They had grown step by step with the support of the Sidney family. They were a force that the Sidney family had supported and trusted. But if they suddenly switched to another noble family, they would naturally not be trusted and would be suspected by the other nobles. Not only would they be wary, but the noble title they would obtain would also not be too high. For the current Fergus family, the gains would not make up for the losses. If the Fergus family really loses their noble title, then we can move to Mercenary City. With the strength of the Fergus family, they will be able to occupy a place there. You want to turn the Fergus family into a mercenary family?" Earl Fergus looked at Gray and asked. "Yes." Gray nodded. "We have the Red Wing in our hands. They are no strangers to the mercenary industry. We can turn the Fergus family into a mercenary family through them." "That's a good idea." Earl Fergus nodded. If the Fergus family switched to another noble family, the noble title they would obtain would not be too high. For the current Fergus family, there are not many benefits. On the other hand, turning the Fergus family into a mercenary family might be a good choice. The world of mercenaries was a place where strength spoke. Not only was the Fergus family not weak, but they were also quite strong. It was completely possible for them to occupy a place in the world of mercenaries. "I plan to make a trip to Sidney City to see if there are any survivors of the Sidney family." After thinking about it, Gray made up his mind. Although the news said that the Sidney family had been completely wiped out, he still wanted to see if there were any survivors with his own eyes. "Be careful." Earl Fergus did not stop him. He only reminded Gray. After all, the Fergus family was a noble family under the Sidney family. Now that the Sidney family was in trouble, it was reasonable for the Fergus family to make a trip there. When the Fergus family received the news of the Sidney family's destruction, the other noble families in the Sidney territory also received the news one after another. The noble families who received the news were shocked, in disbelief, in fear, and at a loss. They were all extremely shocked by the news and remained silent for a long time. "The Sidney family has been wiped out? How is this possible?" "Impossible. With the strength of the Sidney family, how could they have been wiped out? Which force did it? The nobles were all incoherent. They were shocked by the news. With a desolate level blood fiend like the copperback dragon as their foundation, the Marquis family could be ranked at the top of the 7 major families. It was hard for them to believe that they had been wiped out. It was not just the Sidney territory. As time passed, the nobles outside the Sidney territory also received the news. Their first reaction was disbelief. After careful confirmation, they could not help but be dumbfounded. A Marquis family had been wiped out. How long had it been since something like this happened in the Purple Moon Kingdom? Even since the founding of the kingdom, it had not happened more than 3 times. This was definitely a big deal. Without a doubt, the Purple Moon Kingdom would be in turmoil. A turmoil that would engulf the entire Purple Moon Kingdom had appeared. Chapter 317. He set off on the same day and traveled through the night. At noon the next day, a slightly tired Gray arrived at Sydney City. As they entered the city of Sydney, they could hear the discussions of merchants and pedestrians everywhere. The content of the discussions was all related to the Sidney family. The contents of a few of their conversations attracted Gray's attention, and he couldn't help but stop. "That sound was like thunder," a middle-aged man said. "I thought it was raining, so I hurriedly got up to pack my clothes." "Guess what I saw?" "What did you see?" someone asked curiously. "The sky was blue." "Blue, right? The sky near Sydney Castle is actually blue. It's as if Sydney Castle is glowing," the middle-aged man said with a serious face. "That blue light flashed by, and then I heard a ferocious beast roar. It was so loud that I almost went deaf, but it sounded like it was in pain." "In pain?" "Yes, it sounded like it was in pain, like an animal being whipped. It was obviously in pain." After listening for a while, Gray did not hear any more useful information, so he rode toward Sydney Castle. Blue light, could it be the ability of a wind-type blood beast? He frowned slightly. Generally speaking, those that show blue light were mostly wind-type abilities. Of course, this was not absolute. Some abilities that were similar to wind-type abilities also showed blue light. After riding for half an hour, a field appeared in front of Gray. In the field, the most conspicuous thing was a mountain peak. There were cliffs on 3 sides of the mountain peak, and only one of the sides was slightly flat. The ground was paved with stone slabs that led to the top of the mountain. At the top of the mountain, there was a large complex of buildings. That was Sydney Castle. It was supposed to be a very majestic building complex, but at this time, there were obvious signs of severe collapse. The collapsed buildings could be seen from afar. Riding up the mountain, he saw a building that was almost collapsed. The walls had collapsed, the minaret was broken, and the houses were broken. It was hard to imagine that this was a magnificent building more than a month ago. Jumping off the horse and walking into the ruins, Gray saw dried blood stains. It stained the ground and splattered on the wall. It was a ghastly sight. Some of the low-lying areas even formed a bay of blood. One could only imagine what kind of tragic battle had taken place here. From time to time, blood-stained rags could be seen cut off from the clothes, but there were no corpses. Gray continued to walk forward and passed by a house that he had once lived in. At this time, the house had completely collapsed and the roof had fallen down. He passed by another garden where he had chatted over tea with Zeloyan and Polly over a month ago. At that time, Zeloyan had solemnly warned him to be careful of the Wallen family, saying that the Wallen family was acting strangely. But he never thought that the Fergus family would not be attacked, but the Sidney family would be attacked and exterminated. At that time, it was said that the Wallen family was acting strangely, and then the Sidney family was wiped out. Could it really be the Wallen family who did it? But the Wallen family should not have this kind of power. Recalling Zeloyan's solemn warning, Gray could not help but suspect that all this was the work of the Wallen family. But with the Wallen family's power, they should not have been able to do this to this extent. Not to mention the strongest power of the Wallen family. The rune puppet with the strength of a desolate blood warrior would not have been able to be transported away quietly. Even if it had been transported to Sydney Castle, it would at most be on par with the Sidney family's copperback dragon. It should not have had the ability to destroy the Sidney family. Could there be other forces involved? Did the Wallen family join forces with other forces? If all this was really done by the Wallen family, then there must be other forces involved. Otherwise, with the strength of the Wallen family, it was absolutely impossible to destroy the Sidney family. That's right, the Sidney family still has a barbarian blood warrior overseeing the Stormwind Hills. I wonder how he is. Gray felt that this elder of the Sidney family was likely to have met with misfortune. After all, even a branch of the Sidney family had not been spared, let alone a barbarian blood warrior like him. As he continued forward, a burnt smell wafted into Gray's nose. Already having a vague guess, Gray walked forward and immediately saw that the back garden of the Sidney family was charred black. Amidst the charred marks, there were corpses piled up into a small mountain. One of the corpses was extremely large, each bone extremely thick. That was the corpse of a copperback dragon. Destroying the corpses to destroy the evidence? Along the way, the houses that had obviously been deliberately destroyed, as well as the burnt corpses, all showed that the culprit was destroying the traces of battle. Obviously, they did not want anyone to trace their identity through the traces of battle. After leaving the charred Black Garden, Gray walked around the ruins of Sidney Castle, trying to find some traces of battle. Unfortunately, the culprit had destroyed it so thoroughly that he could not find any traces of battle. After a fruitless search, Gray left the castle ruins and came to Sydney City. He spent money to hire a few dozen people and had them bury the corpses of the Sidney family. It was already impossible to distinguish who was who, so Gray could only bury the corpses together. "Young master, I found a basement." A civilian who had been hired to bury the corpses came over and reported to Gray. "Basement? Take me there." Following the civilian, Gray saw a dark hole in the ruins. This place should have been buried before, but it was dug up by the civilian. Gray could guess the other party's intention for doing this. It was nothing more than finding valuable things and making money from the dead. After removing all the gravel covering the top of the cave, a slanted staircase appeared. Taking out a simple rune lamp from his ring, Gray walked down. After descending for about a few dozen meters, a passage appeared in front of Gray. Walking down the passage, he soon saw many shining silver blades on the ground. There were also burn marks, which should be the result of the rune mechanism being activated. Continuing forward, he suddenly saw several rooms made of stone. In the room, there were cabinets and boxes, but at this time, all of them were opened, and there was nothing left inside. In front of him was a stone wall, and there was no road. This should be the Sidney family's treasure vault. It was clear that this was the Sidney family's treasure vault, but it had already been visited by the people who destroyed the Sidney family, and everything had already been moved away. The Sidney family should also have an escape route. This basement made Gray think of an escape route. Maybe someone had escaped through the escape route. After leaving the basement, Gray hurriedly called the civilians and had them continue to search the castle. After a few hours, another basement was found. Walking down the stairs, a huge space appeared before his eyes. In the space, there was food, water, blankets, and even a bed. This should be the basement where the Sidney family hid from danger. After the space, there was a deep passage. Gray walked along the passage. There are footprints. Suddenly, Gray discovered that there were many footprints on the ground of this passage. Did someone successfully escape? Or did the people who destroyed the Sidney family leave these behind? After pondering for a moment, Gray quickly walked along the passage. After walking for more than 100 meters, a huge black metal door blocked the way. The escape route's mechanism has been lowered? Looking at the black metal door, Gray's face flashed with a hint of surprise. The escape route's mechanism had been lowered, which meant that this passage had been used before. Who had used this passage? The answer was self-evident. Could it be that the Marquis and the others have already escaped, but are hiding to avoid being discovered by the enemy? Holding the rune lamp, Gray carefully sized up the black metal wall. He saw that there were scratches on the black metal wall. Someone from the Sidney family must have escaped through this place. Seeing these marks, Gray was even more certain that someone from the Sidney family had successfully escaped. These marks must have been left by the people who wanted to destroy the Sidney family. They wanted to break through this metal wall, but the metal wall's hardness was beyond imagination, and these people did not succeed in the end. After leaving the ruins of Sydney Castle and re-entering Sydney City, Gray quietly left Sydney City after receiving the ferocious wolf's blood from the branch of the Rex Chamber of Commerce. In the process, Gray met other noble families who came to investigate. Gray only greeted them calmly and did not say anything else. He did not spread the news that someone from the Sydney family might still be alive. He did not know if those people had already left Sydney City. If they knew that he already knew that someone from the Sydney family was still alive and that he wanted to save the Sydney family, the Fergus family might be in trouble. He had to save them, but he had to do it secretly. He could not let them know that the Fergus family was saving them. He still had some confidence in this. On the way to Sydney City, he had already set up several teleportation points in secret places. As long as he met up with the people who escaped from the Sydney family, he could use these teleportation points to secretly bring the survivors of the Sydney family to the Fergus family and hide them. Chapter 3:18. After leaving Sydney City, Gray appeared in the forest around the city. The escape tunnel couldn't have led to too far away, so Gray guessed that the exit of the tunnel was most likely in the forest around Sydney City. Although they should have left by now, they must have left traces in the vicinity. He wanted to try and see if he could follow the traces. During the few days he had been following the Demon Hound Mercenary Corps to track down Rob Tracy, he had consulted the Demon Hound Mercenary Corps' leader on quite a number of tracking techniques. It could be considered a small gain, and now it could be put to good use. There are dense footprints here, and they shouldn't have been here for too long, at most a few days. After searching several forests, Gray finally found a clue in one of them. These footprints should have been left by boots, either by the people who escaped from the Sydney family or by the people who chased after them. After carefully observing the footprints, Gray came to this conclusion. This was a technique that Gray learned from the Hellhound Mercenaries leader last time to quickly identify the person who left the footprints. Long boots were made of leather and were quite expensive. Hunters and commoners were reluctant to buy them, so those who wore long boots were usually people with rich family backgrounds. Wearing boots and appearing here in the past few days, although it wasn't absolute, it was very likely that they belonged to one of the two groups. Following the direction of the footprints, Gray quickly followed. Of course, it was only a general direction and not accurate. Gray didn't know how to track by scent, and footprints couldn't be left all the time, so he could only try his luck and see if he could catch up. Let's take a break first. In a forest, a group of 7 people stopped to take a break. Among the 7 people, there were old people, young people, and middle-aged people, but without exception, they all looked tired. The quality of their clothes was not low. In fact, they were quite high-end. However, there were many holes in their clothes. Some looked like they were scratched by tree branches, and some looked like they were cut by blades. There were even traces of blood on them. Among the 7, there was a golden-haired young woman. Her face was delicate and beautiful, but her expression was wooden and her eyes were lifeless. Beside her, a golden-haired young man glanced at the golden-haired young woman with a pained expression. His heart clenched as he handed her a water bottle. Polly liked drinking water. The blonde young woman didn't reach out to take it. Instead, she stared blankly at the young man. "Big brother, are father and mother dead?" The golden-haired young man opened his mouth, wanting to say something to give them hope. But when the words reached his mouth, he couldn't say anything. Under such circumstances, it was almost impossible for his father and mother to survive. They had been hunted down for the past few days and had no chance to enter the city to gather information. Father, mother, not far from the two of them, there was a blond young man. When he heard the blonde young woman's words, he murmured with a deep pain in his eyes. The 3 of them were Zaloyan, Polly, and Darren from the Sydney family. Sai, an aged Sai, came from the only old man among the 7. He was Master Alchemist Tulu. The Sydney family had actually undergone such a huge change. He was deeply shocked and sighed. Such a powerful family had been destroyed just like that. Even though he had personally experienced it, he still felt that it was unreal. Beside the 4 of them, there were 3 other people. They were the guards of the Sydney family. When they had just escaped, there had been more than 10 of them. Unfortunately, they had been killed by the enemies along the way. Now, only the 3 of them were left. "We can't continue forward. They know that we want to seek protection from the Tute Marquis family and have already sent people to intercept us. One of the three guards said. After escaping from the Sydney family, they had planned to head to the neighboring Tute Marquis and seek protection from the Tute Marquis family, who had a good relationship with the Sydney family. Unfortunately, it seemed that the enemy had already guessed their plans and had definitely sent people to intercept them. But if we don't seek protection from the Tute Marquis family, they will find us sooner or later. Master Tulu frowned. We can only go to the Fergus family, Zaloyan said in a low voice. Even if that person doesn't attack, the remaining enemies are still very strong. Can the Fergus family stop them? Master Tulu looked worried. The Fergus family has two magical weapons that can control barbarian blood fiends. If it's one barbarian blood warrior, they should be able to stop them. If it's two. At this point, Zaloyan didn't dare to be certain. This was also the reason why they hadn't immediately rushed to the Fergus family after escaping from the Sydney castle. In their opinion, only a family like the Tute Marquis family could protect them. The second son of Marquis Sydney, Darren Sydney, wasn't optimistic. Now that the Sydney family is being chased by strong enemies, the Fergus family might not be willing to protect us. After all, if they protect us, the Fergus family might be implicated and exterminated. We can only try. Zaloyan smiled bitterly. Rustle, rustle, rustle. At this moment, the rustling of leaves was heard. Then, they saw over a dozen masked figures dressed in black from afar. They held sharp blades in their hands and charged towards them with murderous intent. Not good. They're chasing us again. The seven people's expressions changed drastically. I'll stop them. You guys go first. Grandmaster Tulu stood up and stood in front of the others with a determined look on his face. Swish, swish, swish. His blood fiend ability was a plant ability. Immediately, the plants around him swelled up and turned into long spears. With great momentum, they besieged the dozen or so people. Don't even think about leaving. A cold snort could be heard from the dozen people. Among the dozen or so people, one of them held a long spear and stabbed it into the ground. Whoosh! A wall of flames appeared in front of him, extending more than 10 meters and pushing forward rapidly. All the long spears hit the wall of flames and burned fiercely, eventually turning into ashes. When the flames disappeared, the dozen people broke through the charred ground and surrounded Zaloyan's group of seven. Kill! Knowing that he wouldn't be able to escape if he didn't kill them, Zaloyan let out a low growl. Wielding a long saber, he rushed toward the person in front of the dozen people. Poof! The person raised his weapon to block, but the weapon was knocked away by Zaloyan's ferocious saber. The long saber slashed across the person's chest. Blood spurted from his chest, and he slowly fell to the ground. Just as Zaloyan's saber slashed this person, someone attacked him from the left with a blood fiend ability. A watercolored sharp blade sliced towards Zero, easily slicing through all the plants it encountered along the way. This was the ability to control water. It turned water into a high-pressure water blade, giving it a terrifying destructive power that could cut through metal. Clang! The water blade, which was strong enough to cut through metal, slashed Zaloyan's body, but the sound of metal colliding could be heard. Zaloyan's clothes were torn, and his skin showed the color of black iron. It was this black iron-like skin that blocked the sharp water blade. After blocking the attack of the water blade, Zaloyan rushed toward the man in black who had used the water blade. At this moment, a huge mass of yellow soil rose from the ground and quickly hardened into a rock. Like a meteorite falling from the sky, it crashed toward Zaloyan. Zaloyan had to stop and retreat abruptly to avoid the violent impact of the rock. But the rock didn't stop there. It changed direction and unexpectedly hit him again. He hurriedly used his metal ability. A large amount of black metal powder floated up from the ground and turned into sharp blades, piercing the huge rock and smashing it into powder. At this time, the man in black who had used the water blade just now had already distanced himself from him. The man who had used the rock attack and another man with a similarly strong aura were confronting him. If he wasn't mistaken, both of them should be berserkers. For more people to join forces with us. The man who had used the rock attack was still not at ease and ordered. Immediately, another 4 people came over and surrounded Zero Yang in the middle. Huge rocks, razor-sharp water blades, bluish-white lightning, black shadows, all of them attacked Zaloyan. Even if Zaloyan was strong, his body could be metallized to increase his defense, and he had a powerful magic weapon in his hand. He couldn't help but fall into a bitter battle with the 2 berserkers and 4 berserkers. On the other side, Master Tulu encountered a berserker with the ability of fire. His ability was restrained, and he was completely at a disadvantage. On the other hand, Polly, Darren, and the 3 guards encountered enemies twice their number. Puffed. A guard struggled to cut off the head of a man in black, but the next moment his heart was stabbed by a sword. Blood flowed, and he fell with an extremely unwilling look in his eyes. The other 2 guards were besieged by the 4 men in black. Wounds continuously appeared on their armor, and they were finally sent flying. No one knew if they were dead or alive. Darren Sidney blocked the 3 ferocious blood warriors on his own. Even though he practiced a special blood technique and had a powerful magical weapon, he was still at a complete disadvantage when fighting 2 ferocious blood warriors. Polly was also dodging left and right under the attacks of the 2 men in black. She was in an extremely sorry state. Suddenly, 5 people rushed toward the 2 of them. 4 of them rushed towards Darren Sidney, and the last one rushed towards Polly. Clang, clang. Although Darren Sidney had dodged the sneak attack of the 2 men in black, he had been attacked from behind by the other 2 men in black. Although he had used his metal ability and hardened his body to withstand the 2 attacks, he couldn't help but stagger. The 2 berserkers attacking him from the front slashed his body with the ability of blood fiends, and he was instantly sent flying with his body covered in blood. Oomph! One of the men in black sneered and suddenly rushed out from the side. He slashed Polly's right arm with his sword. Immediately, a bloody wound that was more than 10 centimeters long appeared on Polly's right arm. The sword in her hand fell to the ground with a thud. Chapter 319. Darren. Polly. Bernal panicked when he saw Darren Sidney being sent flying by the black-clothed man's blood beast ability and heard Polly's groan. However, he was currently surrounded by 2 berserkers and 4 ferocious blood warriors. He was in danger himself, let alone rescuing 2 people. Swish, swish, swish. Seeing that Polly was in danger, Master Tulu hurriedly manipulated the plants. Dozens of green vines grew and attacked the 3 people surrounding Polly. However, just as the vines were about to attack the 3 of them, an orange-red flame suddenly appeared and pounced on the vines. The vines were all set ablaze and quickly turned into ashes. Old thing, you want to distract yourself to save people while fighting me? The spear-wielding man sneered. The orange flames turned into a wall and crashed toward Master Tulu. All the plants along the way were turned to ashes. Even the ground was scorched. Master Tulu controlled the plants to block the wall of flames and had to dodge backward. Swoosh! Her weapon fell, but a sword and a sword came at her. Polly's expression changed. She didn't have time to pick up her sword and hurriedly dodged to the side. Poof! However, the 2 people in front of her were as strong as her. They were both high-ranked blood warriors and attacked together. Although she dodged the sword, she was hit in the abdomen by the sword. Her clothes were torn, and a bloody wound appeared on her abdomen. The bright red blood dyed her clothes red. Her hair was messy, and her face was pale. Poof, poof, poof. On the other side, a total of 7 people pounced toward Darren Sidney. Darren Sidney had just gotten up from the ground when he was surrounded by 7 people. Their weapons landed on his body continuously. Even though he could strengthen his body through metallization, there were still more wounds on his body. Both Polly and Darren Sidney were in a dangerous situation where they could be killed at any time. Zero and Master Tulu were anxious, but they were also in danger. They couldn't spare any energy to save the 2 people. Suddenly, the trees around Polly and Darren Sidney seemed to come alive. Huge vines grew out one after another. Each vine was as thick as an adult's thigh. The tips were black and as sharp as spears. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. These thick vines whistled through the air and attacked the men in black surrounding Polly and Darren Sidney at the same time. The sudden attack caused the expressions of these black, clothed men to go pale, and they hurriedly retreated and dodged. However, the speed of these plants and vines was simply too fast. They were like snakes attacking their prey. In the blink of an eye, they had already closed in on them. Poof, 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 poof. Men in black were constantly being pierced by the vines. The huge plant vines were as thick as an adult's thigh, and each of them pierced through the body, leaving a huge hole. The black-clothed men who were pierced by the vines were lucky enough to only struggle for a moment before they died. The unlucky ones were pierced by the vines and struggled in pain until they breathed their last. The expressions of the three ferocious blood warriors who were besieging Darren Sydney changed as they hurriedly retreated. However, the vines were simply too fast. They were as swift as snake-type blood fiends and were even faster than them. They were getting closer and closer to them. One of them held a saber in his hand. The power of blood was infused into the saber, and it immediately burned with orange flames. He slashed the saber at the incoming plant vines. Clang! It was as if he had slashed at metal. An abundant and unstoppable force was transmitted from his hand, causing his hands to go numb. The flames on the saber burned toward the plant vines. The plant vines burned, but they did not immediately turn into ashes. Instead, they continued to pierce forward. Poof! There was no time to dodge. The plant vines pierced through his heart and came out of his back. When the other two ferocious blood warriors saw their companion's miserable state, their power of blood immediately surged, and they both displayed their power of blood. An earth-colored wall appeared in front of one of them, while a ball of cold air emerged in front of the other and froze the plant vines. Poof! The earth-colored wall blocked the plant vines, but more of them pierced toward them. The earth-colored wall was pierced through like a thin piece of paper in front of the numerous plant vines. The black-clothed men at the back had nowhere to hide in front of the numerous plant vines that pierced through the wall. One of the plant vines pierced into their abdomens and pierced through them like barbecued pork. Crack! Crack! The cold air collided with several plant vines. A thick layer of ice immediately formed on the surface of the plant vines, and they were completely frozen. The black-clothed man who had used the cold air heaved a sigh of relief. However, his expression suddenly changed in the next moment. The ice on the long spear suddenly cracked, and the tip of the plant vines pierced through once again. Poof! The tip of the plant vines pierced through his throat. His eyes were wide open. The moment before he died, he maintained an expression of extreme shock. Who's there? The black-clothed men surrounding Polly and Darren were all killed in an extremely short period of time. The remaining black-clothed men could not help but change their expressions slightly as they all looked in that direction. However, they did not see anything. Over there, apart from a few dozen strange vines that were baring their fangs and brandishing their claws, there was nothing else. The vines that pierced through their companions' corpses wriggled like octopuses, emitting a strange atmosphere. Stop pretending to be mysterious. Come out. One of the two berserkers who had surrounded Saroyan abandoned Saroyan and charged towards Polly and Darren Sydney. Since the other party's goal was to save them, he definitely would not watch the two of them be killed. He would definitely be forced out. Swoosh! He wielded a snow-white thin sword with a slightly narrower blade and swung it towards Polly, preparing to cleave her in half. Swish! 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 At this moment, the plants around Polly rapidly grew together. Every root became extremely thick and attacked the black-clothed man with the sword. Oomph! The black-clothed man snorted coldly and slashed at the attacking plant vines. Bang! However, his slash did not have the expected effect. When it struck the plant vines, it was as if it had struck metal. After breaking a few vines, it became weak and could no longer continue. Poof! The ground beneath his feet was pierced through by several vines, piercing deeply into the soil. Even a huge rock was pierced through. If he had not taken a few steps back at the critical moment and dodged the vines, there would have been many holes in his body. At this moment, the vines attacked him again. Anger flashed across his face. Green light suddenly surrounded his purple long sword, and it emitted a sharp, sizzling sound. Poof! The long sword surrounded by green light became abnormally sharp. With one slash, more than 10 vines were severed. He swept out continuously, and dozens of vines attacking him were all severed. His figure flashed, and he pounced towards Polly, who was behind the vines. Green light surrounded the sword in his hand as he viciously slashed at Polly. With the sharpness of the green longsword in his hand, Polly would definitely not be spared if he slashed down. At this moment, more green vines appeared around Polly and pounced towards the sword-wielding man. There were more than 100 vines, each as thick as an adult's thigh. They were like a group of snakes leaving their nest, causing one's hair to stand on end. The sword-wielding black-clothed man was forced to stop. He continuously slashed at these vines. Vines were constantly severed, but they constantly grew out and attacked him. Poof! A vine broke through the blockade of the sword-wielding black-clothed man's longsword and crashed into his body. The sword-wielding black-clothed man hurriedly retreated more than 10 meters away. Dark red blood seeped out his chest. He was clearly injured. Who exactly are you? Glancing at the deep wound on his chest, the sword-wielding black-clothed man's face was slightly gloomy. Although the other party's blood fiend ability was also a plant ability, it was obviously much stronger than the other old man's. He could not help but feel slightly apprehensive. There was still no response. No, what responded to him was a large number of vines attacking him. There were more than a few hundred of them than before. They were like a group of snakes leaving their nest, a sea of green as they attacked him. Crackle. His face turned completely serious. Then in front of him, lightning suddenly burst forth and turned into a huge, winding lightning bolt that attacked forward. Boom! Under the lightning bolt, dozens of vines were charred black and exploded. However, compared to the hundreds of vines, it was obviously not much of an impact. Boom, boom, boom. The sword-wielding black-clothed man's expression changed. He continuously struck out lightning bolts, and the demonic sword in his hand that was surrounded by green light also kept slashing. However, there were too many vines. He was completely surrounded by them. The sharp tips of the vines pierced his body, and wounds began to appear on his body from time to time. Crackle. Knowing that if this continued, he would definitely fall into a dead end. The sword-wielding black-clothed man roared. With him, as the center, several lightning bolts burst forth and shot out in all directions. A large number of vines were blasted away, and the surroundings were charred black. He heaved a sigh of relief and immediately prepared to retreat and meet up with his companions. This person in the dark was not someone he could fight against alone. Suddenly, a thick vine suddenly appeared. Compared to the other vines, this vine was thicker and thicker. It was as thick as an adult's waist. The tip of the vine was jet black and had a metallic texture. Poof! The huge vine was like a weapon used by a giant. It crashed into his chest and carried him away, piercing into the ground. A deep depression appeared on the ground. The sword-wielding black-clothed man's sword fell from his hand. He spat out a mouthful of blood, and his eyes were filled with unwillingness as he weakly collapsed. Damn it, how could this be? In the distance, the berserkers fighting with Zaloyang and Grandmaster Tulu couldn't help but change their expressions. A berserker's companion had actually been killed. The two of them didn't even have time to be shocked. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. A large number of vines attacked the 4 berserkers surrounding Zaloyang. The 4 berserkers frantically dodged, but they still couldn't dodge all of them. 2 of them were pierced by the vines and were skewered like barbecued pork. Retreat. The 2 berserkers panicked and immediately gave the order to retreat. Unfortunately, facing the powerful Zaloyang and the person in the dark, as well as Grandmaster Tulu, none of the black-clothed men were able to escape. They were all killed on the spot. Many thanks for this friend's help. After killing all the enemies, Zaloyang heaved a sigh of relief and thanked the forest. The dense vines parted and a figure walked out. Seeing this figure, Zaloyang's expression immediately changed, and he almost cried out in alarm. Gray, why are you here? Chapter 320. It's Gray Fergus? It's this kid? Darren Sidney and Master Tulu were shocked. They were shocked that Gray would appear here, and they were also shocked by the plant ability that Gray used. After all, they knew that Gray cultivated the Wind Wolf bloodline. Polly's eyes also revealed a trace of light as she looked at Gray in surprise. Gray, why are you here? This isn't the place to talk. Let's leave this place first. Gray shook his head. Yes, this isn't the time to talk about this. Zero nodded solemnly. Although he was also shocked by Gray's appearance, this wasn't the time to talk about this. Although the black-clothed men were all killed, it was clear that this wasn't all that was sent out by the faction that was chasing them. After checking the 3 Sydney family guards, they found that 2 of them were heavily injured, but they weren't dead. Everyone quickly helped them up. There are people in front of us, and there are people chasing us from behind. Where should we go now? Tulu frowned. The others also frowned. I have an idea, Gray said calmly. He didn't explain further. After the guards put their hands together, he activated the spatial ring's teleportation ability. Whoosh! Light and shadow flashed. When Zhao Yuoyang and the rest regained their senses, they discovered that they were no longer at their original location. Instead, they had appeared in another forest. Beneath their feet, there was a strange purple array pattern. How did we suddenly get here? Where is this? They looked at Gray in shock. They didn't understand how they got here. Polly had read a lot of books, so she knew a lot about spatial abilities. She looked at Gray in surprise. Gray, is this spatial teleportation? Yes, this is the spatial teleportation ability. It's the same as the plant ability. It's the ability of a mana weapon that I obtained by chance. Gray nodded and explained. He also explained the plant's ability. With his strength, it was easy for him to kill the black-clothed men who were chasing Zero and the others. Whether it was the fusion of wind and ice, blood fiends, or the ability to control corpses, he could do it easily. However, he didn't do so. Instead, he used the plant ability that he rarely used in order to prevent the faction chasing after Zero and the others from finding out that he was the culprit. The strength and mana weapon that he displayed were a combination of wind and ice abilities, as well as the ability to control corpses. He rarely used the plant ability. Very few people knew about it, so it wouldn't be easy for the other party to suspect him based on his ability. This place is at least 1,000 li away from the previous place. We should be safe now. Let's treat our wounds first. After applying some healing medicine on their wounds, the wounds on their bodies immediately stopped bleeding. Gray then took out some white bandages and wrapped them around their wounds. Afterward, he looked at Zero and said solemnly, "Let's do this." Zero and asked Zero and the others. Fergus, hearing Gray's question, Zero's expression changed again and again. After a long time, his eyes were full of hatred as he gritted his teeth and answered, "It's the king of assassins, Theodore Itziker." What, it's him? Gray's expression changed. The king of assassins, Theodore Itziker, was one of the few king-level masters in the Purple Moon Kingdom. Back in Mercenary City, Zero had seen the battle between Theodore Itziker and the king of mercenaries. He had witnessed Theodore Itziker's shocking destructive power. Although he was shocked by Theodore Itziker's strength, Zero had thought that he wouldn't have any interaction with Theodore Itziker. He didn't expect that they would somehow cross paths. At the same time, he couldn't help but come to a realization. When he had entered Sydney City, he had heard the peddlers talking about a green light that appeared in Sydney Castle that night. At that time, he had guessed that Theodore Itziker's Blood Fiend ability was wind, and the King of Assassins' Blood Fiend ability was wind. How did the Sydney family provoke him? A king-level master who had completed a metamorphosis. Not to mention the Marquis family, even a Duke's family, with the exception of the Kenneth family, which had a king-level master, would not be able to escape the fate of destruction. Logically speaking, given Marquis Sydney's farsightedness, he shouldn't have provoked such an existence of his own accord. We didn't provoke him. He was hired by other forces to deal with the Sydney family. Darren Sydney said with a face full of hatred. Hired by someone? Could it be the Wallen family? Gray immediately thought of the strange movements of the Wallen family that Zero had mentioned more than a month ago. Although I can't be sure, there's at least a 70% chance that it's the Wallen family. Zero's face was gloomy. Logically speaking, the King of Assassins is a king-level master. The Wallen family shouldn't have the ability to hire him. How exactly did the Wallen family hire him? Gray furrowed his brows. Evolution herbs. The king of assassins personally admitted that some forces used evolution herbs as the price to hire him. Evolution herbs? The Wallen family actually obtained evolution herbs. Gray's face was full of shock. Indeed, if it was just one evolution herb, it would be enough to hire the king of assassins. Back then, the king of assassins had directly raided Mercenary City to steal evolution herbs. It was clear that he valued evolution herbs and was eager to obtain them. More than a month ago, we discovered the strange movements of the Wallen family. Although we tried our best to guard against them, we didn't expect them to hire the king of assassins. Zero clenched his fists so tightly that his fingernails dug into his flesh. Polly and Darren also had sorrowful expressions. Gray looked at Zero and the other two rather sympathetically. The sudden attack of the king of assassins was like an irresistible natural disaster to them. In the face of an irresistible force, even if they were already on guard, it was still difficult to avoid. In the face of absolute power, all calculations were useless. Don't be too sad. As long as the three of you are still alive, there will be a day of revenge. Gray consoled them. Revenge? Zero smiled bitterly and shook his head. Revenge was easier said than done. The other party was a king-level fighter. The height that the other party stood at was a height that he could never reach in his lifetime. Although he was confident in his own potential, he wasn't so blind as to think that he could become a king-level fighter. Besides, to become a king-level fighter, large amounts of resources were indispensable. Just this alone was enough to choke him to death. Seeing Zero like this, Gray sighed in his heart. A king-level fighter was indeed a mountain that was strong enough to make one despair. Even he, who was confident in his own growth, felt immense pressure, let alone Zero. The king of assassins did such a thing. The royal family will definitely not let him off. Although you can't kill your enemy personally, the royal family can do it for you. After thinking for a while, Gray said, "Yes, the royal family and the royal family. The royal family will avenge the Sydney family." Darren Sydney was pleasantly surprised. It was as if the clouds had parted to reveal a clear sky. Zaloyang and Polly could not help but reveal traces of joy in their eyes. Now, only the royal family had the ability to kill the king of assassins and avenge the Sydney family. Seeing that the three of them looked much better, Gray heaved a sigh of relief. What he said just now was just to comfort the three of them. If the king of assassins was so easy to kill, he would have been killed long ago. After all, the other party had once assassinated the king of the Purple Moon Kingdom. How could the royal family not want to kill him? The reason why he was still alive was definitely because the royal family had tried to kill him, but they couldn't kill him. Use the teleportation ability. Rest. Use the teleportation ability. After using the teleportation ability twice, Gray brought Zero and the rest to the basement of Fergus Castle. After temporarily settling them down in the basement, Gray informed Earl Fergus and Bernal. The two of them came to the basement and saw the few of them. After understanding the whole story, they couldn't help but sigh. Life was unpredictable. They really didn't expect the Sydney family to be in such a predicament. Young Master Zero, young Master Darren, Miss Polly, please don't be too sad. Earl Fergus consoled them. We understand. Don't worry, we won't be dispirited just because of this. Zero's dejection was swept away, and he had already returned to his usual demeanor. However, one could still see a trace of sadness in his eyes. Although Polly and Darren still looked sad, they weren't as dejected as they were before. As descendants of the Marquis family, they had been exposed to the strictest aristocratic education since they were young. They knew very well what to do in such a situation. After staying in the basement for a while, Gray and the rest got up and left. Earl Fergus said apologetically, "In order to prevent the news from leaking, I have to trouble you to stay in the basement for now. We're already very grateful to have a place to hide." Zero shook his head and said gratefully, "Yes, we're really grateful this time." Polly also said gratefully. Facing a powerful enemy like the king of assassins, they had almost lost all hope. They were already very grateful that the Fergus family could save them and provide them with a place to hide. After all, They were very clear about the risks they had to take. Chapter 321. After that, Zero and the others stayed in Fergus Castle. In order to keep it a secret, Grey, Earl Fergus, and Bernal took turns to deliver their meals. Apart from Grey and the other two, no one else knew of their existence. Even Sarah and the others did not know. Everything was to keep a secret. After all, the other party was a king-class expert. If the news leaked, the Fergus family would not be spared. Originally, the most obvious choice at this time would be to cut ties with Zero and the others. However, neither Grey nor Earl Fergus would do such a thing. The Sidney family had treated the Fergus family well. They were not cold-blooded people to that extent. Moreover, Grey had used his planned ability to save them. The other party probably would not think that the Fergus family had done it. Although Grey had used his planned ability once when he killed Rob Tracy, it had only been for a short period of time. The two barbarian blood warriors of the Wallen family might not have seen it. After all, the two of them had been fighting with the two barbarian blood warriors of the Sidney family and did not have the spare energy to pay attention to Rob Tracy. Moreover, Master Tulu also had planned ability. The planned ability that Grey had used could have been mistaken as Master Tulu's. 2 days later, in the study of the Fergus family, Grey, Earl Fergus, and Bernal were inside. Many noble families in the territory have fallen into panic. Although they have been comforted, it has not been very effective. Bernal frowned as he spoke. The news of the Sidney family's destruction had already spread throughout the Sidney territory. All the nobles in Earl Fergus territory naturally knew. As nobles of the Fergus family, if the Fergus family's territory was taken back and they were stripped of their titles, these nobles who had been infected by the Fergus family would naturally be stripped of their titles and territories. This caused many nobles to hesitate. Don't worry about it. We can use this opportunity to see which nobles are useless. Earl Fergus said nonchalantly. The Sidney family had not been completely destroyed, and there were still successors. The Fergus family's title was stable, so there was no need to worry about that. Instead, they could use this method to determine which clans were suitable for them to focus on. Once there was a problem with the Fergus family, they would immediately think of leaving the Fergus family. This kind of family was obviously not very useful. Earl Fergus asked with a serious expression, "Are there any traces of strangers in the territory?" From what Zhang and the others had said, the black-clothed men who had chased after them previously were a force nurtured by the King of Assassins. Because Zhao Yuoyang and the others had escaped, they were currently searching for and hunting them down. Although the other party probably wouldn't suspect the Fergus family after what Grey did last time, they still had to be on guard. Therefore, he asked Bernal to keep an eye out for strangers who suddenly visited the territory, especially those who appeared in a group of 10 or more people. No, after you asked me to keep an eye out, I sent out a lot of spies in the territory and didn't find a large number of strangers entering the territory. Bernal shook his head and said, "That's good." Earl Fergus nodded, then looked at Grey and asked, "Grey, have you prepared hiding place?" Standing on the opposite side of a terrifying opponent like the King of Assassins, they naturally had to be prepared to retreat at any time. Therefore, he had already asked Grey to find a hiding place 2 days ago. "I've found it. It's located in a cave in the Red Leaf Forest. I've already set up a teleportation point. Once we find something wrong, we can immediately teleport there." Grey nodded and said, the purple metal ring obtained from the ghost merchant not only had the ability to teleport, but also had a huge storage space. Now, Grey had stuffed this space with food, enough to feed dozens of people for a few years. If the King of Assassins really attacked, they could hide in that cave for a few years. "Father, the Royal Investigation Team should be here soon, right? They should be here soon, at most 2 or 3 days. By then, the King of Assassins and his forces will withdraw, and we will be completely safe." Earl Fergus said. Even the King of Assassins would never dare to stay in Sidney after the royal family arrived. Although the King of Assassins was powerful, the most powerful force in the entire Purple Moon Kingdom was definitely the royal family of the Purple Moon Kingdom. As long as the royal family of the Purple Moon Kingdom sent an investigation team, the King of Assassins would definitely retreat. Although we'll be safe in 2 or 3 days at most, Don't be careless. Earl Fergus said solemnly. We know. Gray and Bernal both nodded. Clap, clap, clap. Along with the sound of hurried footsteps, the voice of Nick, the butler, was heard outside the door. My lord, there's urgent news. What urgent news? Gray and the other two couldn't help but feel their hearts skip a beat. At times like this, they were most worried about unforeseen events. Every time an urgent news appeared, it meant that something big was about to happen. Earl Fergus personally opened the door, took the bamboo tube that was as thick as a thumb, and opened the note containing the urgent news. Gray and Bernal hurried forward to read it together. The Wallen family is here. Gray raised his eyebrows. The content of the letter was very simple. It said that the Wallen family's team had driven into Fergus territory and were heading towards Fergus Castle. Why would the Wallen family come at this time? Could it be that they've discovered that young Master Zaloyan and the others are hiding in the Fergus family? Bernal looked worried. They might not have discovered that young Master Zaloyan and the others are hiding in the Fergus family. Gray shook his head. Last time, I heard from young Master Zaloyan that the Wallen family had investigated the Fergus family because of Rob Tracy's murder. The Wallen family might very well be here because of Rob Tracy. No matter what, they definitely don't have good intentions. Earl Fergus frowned. Father, do we need to withdraw immediately? Bernal asked worriedly. We can't withdraw now. If we withdraw, the King of Assassins and his faction will definitely link the disappearance of young Master Zaloyan and the others to the Fergus family. Earl Fergus shook his head. I agree that we should wait and see. If it's just the Wallen family, with our current strength, we have nothing to fear. Gray nodded. I was too anxious. Bernal shook his head with a smile. When he heard that the Wallen family was coming with bad intentions, he couldn't help but panic. He had completely forgotten that the Fergus family was no longer the same as before. Earl Fergus could control one barbarian-level blood fiend, while Gray could control 4. With this kind of strength, they already had the ability to fight the Wallen family. Unless the Wallen family mobilized their resources and brought the rune puppet with the strength of a desolate blood warrior, it wouldn't be too late to escape then. Although the 5 barbarian-level blood fiends were not as powerful as the rune puppet, they could still buy time for the Fergus family and Zaloyan and the others to escape. After all, they still had the ability to teleport. Rumble. A team of dozens of people moved quickly in Fergus's territory. Wherever he passed, dust and dirt flew everywhere. Although there were only dozens of people in the team, the impact they caused was definitely not less than that of hundreds or even thousands of people. The guards were all riding on tall horses. These horses were tall and big, and their eyes were bright and full of expression. At a glance, one could tell that they were extremely outstanding breeds. Among them, there were even a few breeds that were comparable to the scarlet blood horses. These guards were all dressed in battle armor. Their backs were straight, and their gazes were sharp. They were all blood warriors, and their strength shouldn't be too low. In the middle of these guards was a luxurious carriage. The carriage was extremely wide, twice the length and width of an ordinary carriage. Surprisingly, a 4-meter-long tiger-shaped blood fiend was pulling the carriage. The tiger-shaped blood fiend was covered in white fur and had an extremely majestic physique. It was a berserk blood fiend, the Ice Tiger. On top of the carriage, there was a circular ring with the symbol of a plant in it. That was the symbol of the Wallen family. The team moved forward in a grandiose manner. Soon, they could see a short hill with a castle at the top. At this moment, this team also stopped because another team had come out in front of this team. This was a team of hundreds. The people in front of the team were all riding horses, while the people behind were all standing in neat rows. This was the aristocratic team that the Fergus family and the Fergus family had infected. Earl Fergus rode on Hanhu and looked at the Wallen family team. May I know why the Wallen family has come to Fergus's territory? You have guts. You actually dare to take the initiative to welcome the arrival of the Wallen family. A young man who was riding a horse that was no weaker than a crimson blood horse and wearing an exquisite battle armor glanced at Count Fergus with disdain. Don't the Fergus family know why the Wallen family is here today? The young man's face was fair, and he had short brown hair. His body emitted a strong arrogance. Why? Sorry, I really don't know. Riding on the scarlet blood horse, Gray said coldly. You're Gray Fergus, right? Rob Tracy was a member of the Wallen family, but you ambushed and killed him. How do you intend to settle this score? The young man looked at Gray. Then how do you intend to settle this score with the Wallen family? Gray looked at the young man and asked with a faint smile. Hand over the magical weapon that you obtained from Rob Tracy and the magical weapon that can control barbarian-level blood fiends as compensation. Then cripple one of your arms and become a servant of the Wallen family for life. The young man raised his head and looked at Gray. Don't you think this is too much? Bernal said angrily. Too much? So what? The young man's face was full of contempt. Now that the Sidney family has been destroyed, who can save your Fergus family? Chapter 322. It seems like you're going to take down the Fergus family. Gray squinted his eyes and said, What, do you think the Fergus family still has a chance to turn the tables? A mocking smile appeared on the young man's face as he glanced behind Gray and the other two. Many of you should be nobles from the Fergus family, right? Now that the Sidney family has been destroyed, no one can save the Fergus family. Do you still want to die with the Fergus family? Behind Gray and the other two, many of the nobles' expressions changed. Some of their eyes flickered as their gazes wandered. It was clear that the young man's words had given them some ideas. More accurately, the young man's words had drawn out their original thoughts. Seeing these nobles' reactions, the young man's lips curled into a playful smile as he continued. I'm sure you all know that your titles and lands will be taken back soon. I'll give you a chance. Join the Wallen family, and the Wallen family will give you your titles and lands again. Following the young man's words, many of the nobles' eyes flickered even more. Some of them even looked at each other, communicating with their eyes. What? Are you still hesitating? You only have one chance. Don't regret it if you miss it. The young man said again. The Harry family is willing to follow the Wallen family. Following these words, a middle-aged man and a young man quickly rode out from behind Gray and the other two and joined the Wallen family's team. Both of them were slightly chubby. They were Lord Harry and his son from the Fergus family. The Rockney family is willing to follow the Wallen family. The Craw family is willing to follow the Wallen family. The Carter family is willing to follow the Wallen family. The betrayal of the Harry family's father and son immediately caused a chain reaction. 3 more families joined the Wallen family. It wasn't just these 3 families. A portion of the soldiers also joined the Warren family's ranks after their betrayal. The Fergus family's ranks were thrown into chaos. Good, very good. Looking at Gray and the other two, the young man said with a smug expression, All the nobles who defected to the Wallen family will receive the title of nobility and land. All the soldiers who defected to the Wallen family will receive double the benefits. Thank you, young master. The 3 nobles who had sided with the Wallen family were overjoyed. The Harry family, the Rockney family, the Clive family, the Carter family, and the Fergus family have always treated you well. How could you do something like this? Don't you feel ashamed? Lord Lind glared at the 4 families and scolded them angrily. Although the Fergus family has treated us well, they wouldn't ask us to sacrifice our own family for the sake of the Fergus family, right? Lord Harry said unabashedly. That's right. Behind each of us are not only ourselves, but also our families. We had no choice but to make this choice. Lord Cuff agreed. He was a skinny man with a mustache, and there was no shame on his face. What a helpless move. Gray stared coldly at Lord Cuff. You enjoyed the benefits of the Fergus family, but at the most critical moment, you stabbed them in the back. It's really hard on you. It's rare to be as shameless as you. But do you think that betraying the Fergus family won't have to pay the price? Suddenly, a green wind blade appeared in front of Gray. In the blink of an eye, it crossed tens of meters and arrived in front of Lord Cuff. Puff! Lord Cuff didn't even have time to react before he was cut in half along with his horse. There was no blood spurting out because it was already frozen before it splashed out. Facing the ice wind blade that had the power of a barbarian blood warrior, the opponent, who was only a middle blood warrior, couldn't react at all. How dare you? You actually dare to make the first move, the young man said with a cold face. He sensed Gray's ice wind blade. But before he could block it, Lord Cuff was already cut in half. The Wallen family had just accepted this noble, and this noble was killed immediately. This made him very angry. Why wouldn't I? Gray sneered in disdain. In front of him, another ice wind blade appeared and slashed out even faster towards Lord Harry. The young man sneered. Large amounts of plants quickly grew around Lord Harry. Soon, they were as tall as a man and blocked the ice wind blade that was coming towards Lord Harry. Puff! Lord Harry and his horse were also cut in half. The plants were cut into pieces and frozen. The ice wind blade broke through the plants and finally cut Lord Harry and his horse in half. You! The young man's face turned green. He couldn't stop Abel's attack and let another person die. He couldn't help but feel ashamed. Shwa shwa shwa. Driven by his anger, a large number of plants turned into thick vines, baring their fangs and brandishing their claws, attacking Gray from all directions. Gray's face turned cold in the face of all the plants and vines. In front of him, 3 ice wind blades were unleashed. Under the first ice wind blade, large amounts of plants were cut in half. Under the second ice wind blade, all the plants were cut in half. The third ice wind blade went straight for the young man without any resistance. The young man's face changed. He pulled out his sword and infused it with blood energy. Flames began to wrap around the sword and spread out for a few meters. He then slashed toward the ice wind blade. Boom! With a loud bang, the flaming longsword collided with the icy wind blade. Then, the flames dissipated and the young man was sent flying from his horse. He retreated more than 10 meters in a sorry state. On the other hand, the stallion he was riding, whose quality was not inferior to the Crimson Blood horse, was killed by the icy wind blade. Shwa shwa shwa. 3 more ice wind blades appeared in front of Gray, aiming straight for the young man. Bang, bang, bang. Seeing that the young man was about to be hit by the 3 ice wind blades, the surrounding plants suddenly grew vines that were as thick as an adult's thighs and attacked the 3 ice wind blades. Crack! The 3 ice wind blades shattered like glass. Although the plants and vines were cut in half and frozen, it was obvious that the plants had the upper hand. Compared to before, the plant's abilities were now several times stronger. You do have some strength. No wonder you could kill Rob Tracy with a sneak attack. The curtains of the carriage pulled by the ice tiger opened, and 2 old men walked out. These 2 old men were the 2 barbarian blood warriors that Lin Fan had met when he was chasing after Rob Tracy. One of the 2 old men stared at Gray with an indifferent gaze. What a rare bloodline mutation, to be able to increase your strength by so much. I'm afraid that there are very few people in the mad stage who could be your opponent. Unfortunately, you shouldn't have stood against the Wallen family. Shouldn't have stood against the Wallen family? Earl Fergus coldly snorted. As a noble of the Sidney family, do you expect my Fergus family to stand on the side of your Wallen family? If your Fergus family hadn't killed Rob Tracy, my Wallen family could have made your Fergus family a noble. Unfortunately, your Fergus family killed him. The old man who spoke earlier said. But what you said makes some sense. How about this? Your Fergus family will hand over the 2 magical weapons. I can make the decision to cripple one of Gray Fergus's eyes. Then I'll have to thank your Wallen family for being so lenient. Gray sneered. But I'm not interested in being a one-eyed dragon. I'll keep this kind of treatment for myself. You're about to die, and you still dare to be so stubborn. The old man's expression suddenly turned cold. The coldness in his eyes was so cold that it could freeze people. Why are you wasting your breath on him? There's no need to keep a family like the Fergus family that is so loyal to the Sidney family. The other old man said coldly. That's true. The old man in front nodded, his eyes also filled with coldness. Whoosh, whoosh. The 2 of them charged out at almost the same time. One of them charged towards Earl Fergus, while the other charged towards Gray. On the ground, as the 2 of them stepped forward, a sound similar to that of a leather drum could be heard. When the sound fell into the ears of the ordinary soldiers, it was like an invisible giant hammer. Some of the ordinary soldiers couldn't help but feel their hearts beating rapidly. Facing the 2 people who charged towards them, both Gray and Earl Fergus had a slightly serious expression. Not only were these 2 barbarian blood warriors, but because of the blood techniques they cultivated, their combat strength was comparable to a special barbarian blood fiend. Bang bang! With two loud sounds, the iron-armed barbarian ape and the tusked boar suddenly appeared in the outside world. Then, they charged towards the two old men respectively. The iron-armed barbarian ape had a pair of fists that were as thick as a water tank. With a few steps, its fists were like black meteorites that hammered down with a terrifying whistling sound. The tusked boar had a large body that was like a small black mountain. When it stepped on the ground, rumbling sounds could be heard. Then, it suddenly roared, and a terrifying invisible shockwave immediately charged towards the old men. The two old men snorted coldly. One of the old men was skinny and held a black heavy sword in his hand. Without dodging, he met the iron-armed barbarian ape's giant fist head-on. As for the other old man, a large number of plants suddenly grew crazily in front of him, transforming into giant vines that intertwined into a giant wall to block the sound wave attack from the tusked boar. Boom! The skinny old man's heavy sword collided with the iron-armed barbarian ape's fist, creating a violent impact. However, unexpectedly, the old man wasn't sent flying. Instead, he used his thin body to block the iron-armed barbarian ape's fist. Boom, boom, boom. Fists and swords continuously collided, emitting blazing sparks. Boom! The invisible shockwave collided with a wall of vines. Layer after layer of the wall of vines was shaved off, but in the end, the wall of vines still managed to block the invisible shockwave. Chapter 3:23. Not long after the two elders charged towards the Fergus family, the rest of the Wallen family also charged towards the Fergus family. Among them, there were even those who had just pledged allegiance to the Wallen family, evidently wanting to use this method to display their loyalty. The fact that the Fergus family was actually able to produce two barbarian-level blood fiends and even contend against the two barbarian blood warriors of the Wallen family greatly surprised them. If they had known earlier, they wouldn't have been in such a hurry to betray the Fergus family. However, since they had already betrayed them, there was naturally no turning back. Now, they could only hope that the final victor would be the Wallen family. Otherwise, they would certainly be miserable. Swish, swish, swish. Looking at the rest of the Wallen family charging towards him, Gray's eyes revealed a cold expression. In front of him, icy wind blades appeared and slashed towards the Wallen family. Pu. The icy wind blades were emerald green like jasper, but at this moment, they had transformed into the scythe of the Grim Reaper. Every one of them was enough to slash several people in half. Some of the weaker ones were even directly frozen to death by the cold air. Apart from a young man and the three berserkers, no one else was able to resist. Even the ferocious blood warriors were killed. However, even the young man and the three berserkers found it extremely difficult to resist the sharpness of the icy wind blades. The icy wind blades were the ability of a mixed blood fiend that had reached the barbarian level. It was obviously not something they could contend against. Pu. Immediately, people from the Wallen family were continuously killed by Gray's icy wind blades. Reckless, seeing his own family members being killed one after another by Gray, the skinny elder fighting the iron-armed barbarian ape snorted coldly. Then, suddenly, a large number of plants grew at a terrifying speed and quickly wrapped around the iron-armed barbarian ape's legs and hands. Then, with an icy gaze, he charged towards Gray with a murderous intent. At the same time, the elder fighting the iron-armed barbarian ape's plants and vines madly grew and attacked the iron-armed barbarian ape. Immediately, the iron-armed barbarian ape, which was as large as a mountain, was sent flying. With a murderous gaze, he charged towards Earl Fergus. Looks like I can't hide it anymore. Seeing the skinny old man rushing towards him with killing intent in his eyes, Gray remained calm. The Fergus family had a magic weapon that could control barbaric-level blood fiends. They had obtained a weapon that could control barbaric-level blood fiends from Rob Trey. The Fergus family could control a total of 2 barbaric-level blood fiends. This was the impression the Fergus family gave to the outside world. Originally, Gray wanted to rely on this little bit of combat power to see if it was enough to contend against the Wallen family. Now, it seemed that it was impossible. Bang! The power of blood flowed into the purple metal ring. Suddenly, a huge green praying mantis appeared. Its huge body waved two huge scythes. It tore through the air and attacked the skinny old man. On the other side, Earl Fergus, who had long been prepared, also quickly took out the bear-shaped brute-level blood beast that he was controlling from his runed space bag. In fact, the two barbaric-level blood fiends just now were controlled by Gray. He didn't even take out the one he was controlling. As for why Gray could control so many barbaric-level blood fiends, Gray explained that it was one of the benefits he had obtained from trading with the ghost merchant. You can actually control more barbaric-level blood fiends. Seeing the sudden appearance of the ghost blade mantis, the skinny old man's expression finally changed. He finally felt that things had gone beyond their expectations. Because they knew that the Fergus family could control two barbaric-level blood fiends, the Wallen family had sent him and another barbaric blood warrior to be foolproof. But now, he finally felt that things had developed beyond his expectations. The Fergus family could actually control more barbaric-level blood fiends. On the other side, the old man who was charging towards Earl Fergus also changed his expression when he saw the ghost blade mantis. However, he still charged towards Earl Fergus without hesitation. The person in front of him was one of the controllers of the barbaric-level blood fiends. As long as he was killed, one of the barbaric-level blood fiends would immediately lose its ability to move. However, just as he was about to reach Earl Fergus, a huge creature appeared in front of him and blocked his path. It was a humongous, 7-meter-tall, bear-shaped beast with brown fur all over its body. Without a doubt, it was another barbaric-level blood fiend. His expression was completely shocked. Including the previous barbaric-level blood fiend, there were now 4 of them. In other words, the Fergus family could control 4 barbaric-level blood fiends. How can this be? How can the Fergus family control 4 barbaric-level blood fiends? Seeing that his family's elder had shaken off the barbaric-level blood fiends and was charging towards Gray and Fergus, the young man heaved a sigh of relief. The strength displayed by the other party was simply too powerful. He alone was able to suppress him and the other 3 barbaric blood warriors. He even had the strength to attack the others. However, what he did not expect was that the other party could control even more barbaric-level blood fiends. In the blink of an eye, 2 more barbaric-level blood fiends appeared. This result caused him to break down. His family's 2 elders were very powerful. One barbaric-level blood fiend was definitely not a match for them. However, if there were 2 of them, it would be hard to say. Not only him, but the expressions of the other members of the Wallen family changed as well. The Fergus family was actually able to control 4 barbaric-level blood fiends. This was simply too shocking. How can this be? How can a Fergus family have such strength? If they had such strength, why didn't they show it earlier? The expressions of the aristocrats who had betrayed the Fergus family and defected to the Wallen family had completely changed. Their hearts were filled with resentment towards the Fergus family for not revealing this strength earlier. If they had known that the Fergus family had such strength, they would definitely not have betrayed them. They had obviously betrayed the Fergus family, but now they were blaming the Fergus family. The word shameless had been used on them. Crack! Under the brute force of the iron-armed barbarian ape, the vines binding it were all broken. It immediately pounced towards the skinny elder and attacked him together with the ghost blade mantis. The tusked boar that had been sent flying also got up and attacked the other elder together with the bear-shaped blood fiend. Instantly, the 2 elders could no longer maintain their calm. They used their planned abilities and close-range attacks simultaneously, trying their best to resist the attacks of the 2 barbaric-level blood fiends. Gray looked at the young man and smiled, revealing his white teeth. How about it? Do you want me to hand over my magic weapon, cut off one of my arms, and become a servant of the Wallen family for the rest of my life? Being stared at by Gray, the young man suddenly felt a chill and could not help but take a few steps back. At this moment, he finally felt fear. Swish, swish, swish. Gray rode his horse and charged into the Wallen family's ranks. All the members of the Wallen family avoided him with fear on their faces. He looked at the young man and the other 3 berserkers, and once again he slashed at the 4 of them with his icy wind blades. Under the barbarian level icy wind blades, the 4 of them could only block them in a sorry state. They could only block and had no way to counterattack. Pop! After a series of difficult blocks, one of the berserkers finally could not hold on any longer. He was directly hit by an icy wind blade, and his entire body was frozen and sent flying. However, before he could break free from the ice on his body and get up, another icy wind blade appeared and slashed his neck. Immediately, his head flew high into the air and fell to the ground with a thud. He couldn't be more dead. Pop! Soon, the 2nd and 3rd berserkers followed in the footsteps of the 1st. One of them was hit by 2 of Gray's icy wind blades consecutively, breaking his bones and shattering his heart. Another person was cut in half at the waist and died. At this point, of the 4 berserkers of the Wallen family, only the young man was left. As for the rest of the Wallen family, there were only a dozen or so people left. Even if Gray did not target these people, under the influence of Gray's icy wind blades, many of the Wallen family members were still killed. Jumping down from his horse, Gray directly pounced on the young man. Crackle! A berserker of the Wallen family blocking the way was cut in half by Gray's sword, and his corpse turned into 2 pieces of charcoal. Seeing Gray pouncing on him, the young man's expression changed. Ignoring the loss of blood energy, a large number of plants madly grew, protecting him and attacking Gray. Swish, 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 swish. 5 icy wind blades attacked him one after another. 3 icy wind blades slashed through, and all the plants were neatly cut in half and frozen into ice sculptures. Swish! The 4th icy wind blade slashed out, and the young man's magic sword was wrapped in flames. He gritted his teeth to block, but he was hit and staggered back. Swish! The 5th icy wind blade slashed out, and the young man's expression became flustered as he hurriedly dodged to the side. Pop! The icy wind blade brushed past his right arm, and suddenly his right arm, together with the sword in it, was sent flying high into the air and fell to the ground with a clatter. Ah, my arm! The young man's face distorted as he cried out in pain, looking at his severed arm in disbelief. Before, he had said that he would let the other party cripple his own arm, but now the other party's arm was intact, while his own arm was cut off. This contrast made him furious. You actually dare to cut off my arm. He looked at Gray with hatred. Why wouldn't I dare? Gray sneered. Since the Wallen family had already come knocking, what did he not dare to do? Chapter 3:24. Don't worry. That was just the interest. Gray's eyes turned cold. Another icy wind blade appeared in front of him and headed straight for the young man's other arm. The young man's expression changed drastically, and he hurriedly dodged to the side. However, with one of his arms cut off and being attacked by the cold air, even though he managed to break free from the ice on his body was no longer as nimble as before. Soon, his other arm was about to be cut off. Crack! Suddenly, more than 10 gigantic vines, each as thick as an adult's waist, appeared in front of the young man. They whipped out abruptly and broke the icy wind blade. Then, they headed straight for Gray. Gray's expression changed slightly. 5 icy wind blades slashed out and cut off the gigantic vines. Then he looked around. Suddenly, a large number of plants grew wildly on the battlefield. Within a radius of 100 meters, the plants were twisting and turning wildly. The 4 barbaric-level blood fiends were temporarily blocked by these plants. The 2 elders took the opportunity to distance themselves and appeared in front of the young man. Both of them were injured when they were besieged by the 2 barbaric-level blood fiends. Even they were caught in a tough battle when they were besieged by 2 barbaric-level blood fiends. In the end, they had no choice but to use all of their plant abilities to break free from the siege. You're so vicious. Seeing that the young man's right arm had been chopped off, the 2 elders' faces turned ashen. They stared coldly at Gray. Why didn't you feel that you were vicious when you wanted to chop off my arm and destroy one of my eyes? Gray sneered. When they wanted him to chop off his arm and blind his eyes, The two elders felt that it was only right and proper. Now that their own family's descendant had lost an arm, they suddenly felt vicious. As expected of members of a big family, they were so proficient in using double standards. I admit that I underestimated the Fergus family. However, you chopped off the arm of a descendant of the Wallen family and cut off his future. Aren't you afraid that you'll become a mortal enemy of the Wallen family? The skinny elder said coldly. Your Wallen family has already planned to destroy my Fergus family. Is this not considered a mortal enemy? Gray chuckled disdainfully. Don't be too arrogant. Your Fergus family may be able to control 4 barbarian-level blood fiends, but the power of my Wallen family is not something you can imagine. Another old man said coldly. The other party is stronger than us. Let's retreat for now. The skinny old man said with a gloomy face. Just you wait. I won't let you off so easily this time. The young man was in so much pain that he broke out in a cold sweat. Since you can't beat him, you want to leave just like that? Aren't you being too presumptuous? Gray revealed a mocking smile. For barbarian-level blood fiends appeared around the 2 old men and the young man, faintly surrounding the 3 of them. Taking advantage of the time, just now, the 4 barbarian-level blood fiends had already destroyed the vines. Are you trying to make us stay? Don't forget that the Wallen family is part of the royal family of the Purple Moon Kingdom. If you kill us, the royal family will not let you go. The young man and the 2 old men's expressions changed. The skinny old man tried to put on a strong front and said, Don't worry, I won't kill you. I have no intention of becoming enemies with the royal family. However, I will make sure that today will leave a deep impression on you. Gray revealed his white teeth and said coldly. In the next moment, the 4 barbarian-level blood fiends surrounded the 3 of them. At the same time, Gray attacked the 3 of them. The 2 old men's faces turned gloomy. Vines grew out from their surroundings and intercepted the 4 barbarian-level blood fiends in Gray. Boom, boom, boom. The 4 barbarian-level blood fiends in Gray were not weaker than the barbarians. When they attacked together, their combat power was terrifying. Large patches of plants were smashed. The plants controlled by the 2 old men were destroyed as easily as dry weeds and rotten wood. Boom! The skinny old man could not dodge in time and was punched in the chest. He was instantly sent flying. When he landed on the ground, he spat out a mouthful of blood. Woo! An invisible shockwave hit the other old man and the young man. The old man was also sent flying, as if he had been hammered by an invisible fist. He landed heavily on the ground, and his body was covered with deep wounds. Even though the young man was protected by the old man, he was still sent flying. Many of his bones were broken. The 4 barbarian-level blood fiends took heavy steps and chased after the 3 of them like an army of thousands of horses. Gray followed behind the 4 barbarian-level blood fiends with a cold look in his eyes. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Seeing the 4 barbarian-level blood fiends chasing after them, the 2 old men's faces turned extremely grave. They looked at each other and suddenly released their plant ability. Then, a large number of vines grew out crazily. Each of them was as thick as a water bucket. It was as if tens of thousands of giant pythons had poured out of their nest and attacked Gray and the 4 barbarian-level blood fiends. Gray had no choice but to be cautious in the face of the 2 men's plant ability. He and the 4 barbarian-level blood fiends used all their strength to block the attacking vines. Fergus family, just you wait. Just you wait for the Wallen family's revenge. The Wallen family's old man's sinister voice came from behind the dense vegetation. Revenge? With your Wallen family's rune puppet that's comparable to a desolate level. Aren't you afraid that I'll sneak into Marquis Wallen's territory and wreak havoc? Your Wallen family can try. Gray snorted coldly. He was indeed afraid of the other party's rune puppet, but it did not mean that he was afraid of them. The other party's rune puppet could not move easily. If they wanted to drive it to attack the Fergus family, it would definitely cause a huge commotion. Before that happened, the Fergus family could receive the news and retreat. With the number of barbarian-level blood fiends that the Fergus family could control, even if the other party sent out 3 barbarian-level blood warriors, they would still be able to put up a fight. If the other party really dared to control the rune puppet to attack the Fergus family, he would probably wreak havoc in Wallen's territory. If you dare, my Wallen family will definitely not let you off. We'll definitely raise your Fergus family to the ground. The old man said coldly after being threatened by Grey. I also dare to guarantee that I'll definitely kill all the nobles of your Wallen family. Grey said without the slightest fear. There was no more sound behind the vines. After Grey and the 4 barbarian-level blood fiends destroyed all the vines, the 2 old men and the young man had already disappeared. They're really too arrogant. I really want to keep them all here, Bernal said angrily as he walked over. The battles in other places had already ended. We can only let them go. After all, they're nobles of the royal family. If we kill their direct descendants, the royal family will definitely stand up for them. Earl Fergus frowned and said helplessly. They didn't try to hide anything on their way here. The news of them entering Fergus territory must be known by many people. If we kill them, there's no guarantee that the news won't leak out. Grey also frowned and said with some regret. Although he was helpless, there was no other way. Who asked the other party to have such an insurmountable mountain behind them? The royal family of the Purple Moon Kingdom was a terrifying power that had several king-level warriors overseeing it. It was something that Grey and the Fergus family couldn't afford to provoke. When Grey's strength reached that of a king-level warrior, he would have the ability to contend with this colossus. At that time, it wouldn't be too late for him to destroy the Wallen family. As for now, he absolutely couldn't afford to provoke this colossus. Will the Wallen family attack again? Bernal said worriedly. They probably won't. Grey's words just now should have intimidated them. They probably won't easily attack the Fergus family again. Earl Fergus shook his head and said, but the Wallen family is very likely to have connections with the King of Assassins. Will the Wallen family ask the King of Assassins to attack the Fergus family? Bernal still had a trace of worry on his face. They won't. Someone like the King of Assassins would have to pay a huge price to get him to act. The Wallen family can't continuously take out things that are worth more than evolution herbs. Grey shook his head and then looked in a certain direction. His eyes were cold as he walked over. Earl Fergus and Bernal also walked over with cold expressions. In that direction, there were dozens of people with knives on their necks. These people were the nobles and soldiers that had betrayed the Fergus family. Lord Earl, we were only momentarily blinded by greed. Please forgive us this time. Young Master Grey, I beg you to spare us. Seeing Grey and the other 2 walking over, the nobles and soldiers all begged for mercy. At this moment, their hearts were filled with bitterness. Who would have thought that the powerful Marquis family would be defeated by the Fergus family? In the end, only 3 people escaped. If they had known this would happen, they wouldn't have betrayed the Fergus family and joined the Wallen family. Shameless. Even now, you still have the nerve to beg for mercy? If I were you, I would just find a rock and kill myself. Lord Lynn spat on the face of one of the lords, his face full of disdain. The other nobles all opened their mouths and shouted angrily. As nobles who had been in theft by the Fergus family, they had actually betrayed the Fergus family. Young Master Bernal, please put in a good word for us. We know that we were wrong. Please give us a chance to change. Young Master Bernal, please plead for mercy for the Carter family on account of our friendship of more than 10 years. We were only deceived by the Wallen family this time. Shut up. Now you're thinking of our friendship of more than 10 years? Then why didn't you think of it just now? Bernal scolded with a cold face, then looked at Earl Fergus and asked, Father, what do you think we should do with these people and their families? Earl Fergus didn't make a decision immediately. Instead, he looked at Grey and asked. Grey hated these traitors very much, so he immediately said, I think we should kill all the members of the direct line of descent. If they didn't kill them all, there would be endless trouble in the future. Grey naturally understood this principle. Therefore, Grey had no intention of being merciful at all. He suggested killing all the members of the direct line of descent. Okay, let's do that. None of the members of the direct line of descent should be spared. Following Earl Fergus's words, miserable screams sounded one after another. Those were the screams of the traitors and soldiers before they died. However, this was not the end. Today, the Fergus family would definitely shed a lot of blood. Chapter 325. Grey, Earl Fergus, and Bernal returned to Fergus Castle after killing all the traitorous nobles and soldiers and ordering a few other nobles, including Lord Lind, to exterminate the families of these nobles. It was the Wallen family that attacked. Hearing the news, Zaloyan and the others couldn't help but be shocked, and then their faces were filled with hatred. The place where the Fergus family and the Wallen family had fought was not far from the castle, and the huge commotion had already reached the castle. They had been worried about what kind of power the attack was, but they hadn't expected it to be the Wallen family. The Wallen family was very likely the culprit who had hired the king of assassins to attack the Sidney family. They naturally hated this family that had caused them to be in such a miserable state. "They've already been beaten back?" Zaloyan asked with a grave expression. "They've been beaten back." Grey nodded. "Now that the Sidney family can't even protect themselves, they can't intimidate the Wallen family. Be careful of the Wallen family's rune puppets." Zaloyan warned cautiously. "We understand. The rune puppets cause a huge commotion. If they attack, they'll definitely be alerted in advance. With the teleportation magic weapon, we can easily hide." Grey said. "That's good." Zaloyan and the others sighed in relief. Indeed, with the teleportation magic weapon in Grey's hands, it would be very easy to avoid the Wallen family and escape. With the disappearance of the Sidney family, the nobles of Sidney Hill were all uneasy about their future. Many families began to contact the surrounding nobles. A day later, an important piece of news was sent to the Fergus family. The Smalley family had left Sidney Hill and become a viscount of the Orca family. They were the first nobles to leave Sidney Hill after the attack on Sidney Castle. "You traitor! You're in such a hurry to leave the Sidney family?" Zaloyan's face was full of anger. The Sidney family treated the Smalley family well. They actually became the first nobles to leave Sidney Hill. Darren clenched his fists and gritted his teeth. His eyes were full of anger. The Smalley family is too much. Even Polly, who had always been calm, had an angry expression on her face. Although the Sidney family had been attacked, nothing had been decided. The Smalley family was so eager to leave Sidney Hill and become the first nobles to leave Sidney Hill. No matter what, the Smalley family had gone too far. In the next few days, many nobles left Sidney Hill and joined the surrounding nobles. These nobles already had plans in this regard, and the Smalley family's departure had become the example for these noble families, allowing these nobles to put their plans into practice. During this time, Viscount Iveline visited the Fergus family and asked about the Fergus family's plans. The Fergus family had to take care of Bernal's wife's family. Although they didn't say that Zaloyan and his siblings were still alive, they did remind them not to make a decision too early. They had done what they could. It was up to them to decide what they would do in the end. Nobles left Sidney Hill one by one. At first, Zaloyan and his siblings were furious when they heard that a noble family had left Sidney Hill. Later, they got over it. It wasn't a bad thing for such a fence-sitter family to leave Sidney Hill. Finally, another important piece of news came. The investigation team sent by the royal family to investigate the attack on the Sidney family had finally arrived. The royal family is finally here. Upon hearing this news, Grey and the others, as well as Zero and the others, heaved a sigh of relief. Although they didn't find any traces of the King of Assassins' forces in Fergus Hill, they still couldn't help but worry that they would come looking for them. Now that the royal family was here, the King of Assassins' forces must have left Sidney Hill. They were completely safe. After finding out the temporary residence of the investigation team sent by the royal family, Grey took Zaloyan and the rest to the Fergus family's carriage and hurried there. They arrived at the temporary residence of the investigation team sent by the royal family and reported their identities. Grey, Zaloyan, and the rest met the investigation team sent by the royal family this time. The investigation team sent by the royal family was led by two people. One of them was an old man. His face was thin, and his hair was white and sparse. He looked like an old man with half a foot in the grave, but Grey unexpectedly felt that he was extremely dangerous. Looking at him, Grey felt like he was facing the copperback dragon. The sense of danger he felt was even stronger than the copperback dragon. He even had goosebumps when the old man looked at him. The other person was a young man with purple hair. He was handsome and had a strong sense of authority. It was the aura of someone who had been in a high position for a long time. There was no doubt that this young man's identity was not simple. Prince Francis, Lord Reg, the way Zaloyan addressed the young man confirmed this. The young man was actually one of the princes of the Purple Moon Kingdom's royal family. Gray had heard of this prince named Francis. He was the most talented and reputable prince among the princes of the Purple Moon Kingdom's royal family. At such a young age, he already had the strength of a savage blood warrior. There were even rumors that he was already a desolate blood warrior. If there were no accidents, he would very likely inherit the throne of the Purple Moon Kingdom in the future. Zaloyan, it's really you. Francis clearly recognized Zaloyan. When he saw Zaloyan, he could not help but be surprised and happy. We were lucky to escape. We're the only ones left in the Sydney family. Zaloyan said with a sad expression. If not for the Fergus family risking their lives to save us, we might have all died. At this point, he looked at Gray gratefully. Francis Violet also looked at Gray. There was a hint of sizing him up and a hint of surprise in his eyes. An enemy who could attack the Sydney family must be extremely powerful. The other party was just a small noble and was actually willing to take the risk to save Zaloyan and the others. He could naturally imagine the risks involved. He looked at Zaloyan and asked in a low voice, "What kind of power did this?" As one of the 7 great Marquis family infeft by the royal family, the Sydney family had contributed greatly to the Purple Moon Kingdom for hundreds of years. Whether it was for the reputation of the Purple Moon Kingdom's royal family or the contributions of the Sydney family over the past hundreds of years, this matter had to be investigated thoroughly. "It's the King of Assassins," Zaloyan said through gritted teeth. "What? The King of Assassins?" Francis and the skinny old man beside him were shocked. Although they had guessed that the power behind the attack on the Sydney family was not small, they did not expect it to be so powerful that it was a king-class powerhouse. How did the Sydney family provoke the King of Assassins? The white-haired old man asked in shock. The Sydney family did not provoke the King of Assassins. The King of Assassins attacked the Sydney family because he was hired by another power. Zaloyan smiled bitterly. In the face of a high and mighty king-class powerhouse, the Sydney family could not wait to avoid him. Why would they provoke him? Hired by another power? Are you sure? Francis's eyes flashed coldly as he asked solemnly. The Purple Moon Kingdom's royal family usually turned a blind eye to the occasional conflicts between noble families as long as they did not go too far. On one hand, the royal family did not want the noble families to form factions. On the other hand, competition was a catalyst for strength growth. However, the current attempt to exterminate the Sydney family had exceeded the bottom line of the royal family's tolerance. The King of Assassins admitted it himself on the night of the attack on the Sydney castle. Zaloyan said with a serious expression, "It seems that the royal family's indulgence has caused some families to forget themselves." Francis Violet's face turned cold, and his eyes were cold. "Indeed, it's time to teach them a lesson." The white-haired old man nodded with a cold look in his eyes. The idea of exterminating the Sydney family had exceeded the limits of the royal family's tolerance. There's also the King of Assassins. He attacked the royal family 200 years ago and was hunted down by the royal family. Now, he's reappeared and actually dared to accept such a mission. We must report this to the royal family. The royal family is deeply sorry for the Sydney family's misfortune. Don't worry, the royal family will give the Sydney family an explanation. Francis looked at Zaloyan and the others and said solemnly, "Thank you, Your Highness and Sir Reg." Zaloyan and the others were emotional and grateful. With the royal family's words, there was hope for revenge. Now that the royal investigation team had arrived, the Sydney family's misfortune was finally over. They no longer had to hide in the dark basement. After bidding farewell to Francis and the white-haired old man, Gray, Zaloyan, and the others returned to Fergus Castle in a carriage. Along the way, Zaloyan and the others no longer hid their faces. They openly revealed their faces. Soon, The news that the three siblings of the Sidney family were not killed spread throughout the Sidney territory. After hearing the news, the nobles who were still in the Sidney territory heaved a sigh of relief. The Fergus family actually protected young Master Zaloyan and the others. No wonder they said those things back then. After hearing Fergus's advice, the Evelyns finally endured it. Now that they knew that the three siblings were not dead, they could not help but feel relieved. Some of the nobles who had left the Sidney family were regretting it. Among them, the Smalley family was the most regretful. How can this be? There are still people from the Sidney family alive? Did the Fergus family hide them? Damn it, why didn't the Fergus family reveal this earlier? The original Earl, Smalley, suddenly smashed the tea table with his fist, his face twisted in anger. Although he had successfully obtained the title and fief of the Oka family, it was only the title of Viscount. Compared to his original title, the title and fief were much smaller. It couldn't be compared to his previous title. Chapter 326. As the ruler of one of the four kingdoms, the royal family of the Purple Moon Kingdom possessed terrifying strength and resources. Once they were enraged, other than the royal families of the other three kingdoms, no other forces would be able to resist them. This time, because of the Sidney family incident, the royal family of the Purple Moon Kingdom was enraged. They hunted down the King of Assassins and his forces within the kingdom. After more than 10 days, news came that the subordinates of the King of Assassins, who had chased Zaloyan and the others until they had nowhere to run, had been found one by one. Among them, there were many Berserker warriors, and there were even a few Savage Blood warriors. There was even a Desolate Blood warrior. However, in front of the powerful royal family of the Purple Moon Kingdom, they were all wiped out. Even the Desolate Blood warrior was not spared. This is the strength of the royal family of the Purple Moon Kingdom. After hearing this news, Grey and Earl Fergus were both shocked. Fortunately, when the Wallen family attacked last time, they held back and did not kill the young man and the two elders of the Wallen family. Otherwise, the Fergus family might have been one of the forces wiped out. The King of Assassins' forces are indeed powerful, but the royal family of the Purple Moon Kingdom is even more powerful. Bernal sighed and could not help but feel a little worried. This time, we secretly saved the Sidney family. To a certain extent, we are standing on the opposite side of the King of Assassins. Now that we have been exposed, will we incur their revenge? Regardless of whether it was the Purple Moon Kingdom or the King of Assassins, to the Fergus family, they were unimaginably powerful forces. No matter which force it was, they could easily destroy the Fergus family. This time, the Fergus family had secretly saved Zaloyan and his siblings. If the King of Assassins held a grudge against them because of this, it would definitely be a disaster. Such an existence should not target a small family like ours. Earl Fergus shook his head as if he was comforting himself. Grey went into deep thought. The biggest conflict between the Fergus family and the King of Assassins was that they had provided shelter for the Sidney family and his siblings, which caused the royal family to know that the King of Assassins had tried to assassinate the Sidney family. However, with the power and influence of the royal family of the Purple Moon Kingdom, even if the King of Assassins completely destroyed the Sidney family, the Purple Moon Kingdom would very likely trace it back to the King of Assassins. In this case, the Fergus family would have little effect in the matter of the King of Assassins and his subordinate forces being hunted down. They might not be hated by the King of Assassins. Of course, if the Fergus family appeared in front of the King of Assassins, the King of Assassins would probably slap them to death without hesitation. First, it was the Naim family, and now it's the King of Assassins. Grey could not help but laugh bitterly. Whether it was the Nahum family or the King of Assassins, they were not people that he wanted to provoke. Unfortunately, due to various reasons, he had no choice but to provoke them. If he wanted to be fearless of these forces, the most effective way was to increase his power. Originally, he was already quite satisfied with the speed of his power increase. However, now, he could not help but feel a sense of urgency. The Nahum family and the King of Assassins were two huge mountains that were pressing on his head, and one was bigger than the other. More than 10 days passed, and there was more news. After the King of Assassins attacked the Sidney castle, he had already gone into hiding. Obviously, he had already predicted that the royal family of the Purple Moon Kingdom would target him, so he had already gone into hiding. However, the royal family of the Purple Moon Kingdom was even more powerful. Even if the King of Assassins had already gone into hiding, they still managed to find him through some means. A total of 2 king-level powerhouses started to hunt down the King of Assassins. Even with the King of Assassins' strength, he was inevitably severely injured. Along the way, the King of Assassins was almost killed several times. However, he still managed to escape and escaped into the Flame Kingdom. With the relationship between the Flame Kingdom and the Purple Moon Kingdom, it was obvious that they would not allow the 2 king-level powerhouses of the Purple Moon Kingdom to enter their territory. Although the 2 king-level powerhouses were unwilling, they could only give up on hunting down the King of Assassins. The King of Assassins escaped. How could it be? Even the royal family of the Purple Moon Kingdom could not kill the King of Assassins. Zero and his siblings did not look too good. Their faces were full of disappointment. Originally, they thought that with the royal family's help, they would be able to kill the King of Assassins. However, they did not expect him to escape in the end. He really escaped. Gray muttered to himself. Previously, he had guessed that even the royal family of the Purple Moon Kingdom would not be able to kill the King of Assassins. Now, the results had confirmed his guess. The King of Assassins had successfully escaped from the hunt. The royal family of the Purple Moon Kingdom was not weak. They were actually able to send 2 king-level powerhouses to hunt down the King of Assassins. Moreover, it was very likely that these were not all of their king-level powerhouses. The King of Assassins was not weak either. He was close to 300 years old, and his strength had undergone a metamorphosis above the king-level foundation. Both parties were extremely strong. The strongest party was naturally the royal family of the Purple Moon Kingdom. However, although the King of Assassins was not a match for them, he still managed to escape with his life from the royal family of the Purple Moon Kingdom. Although he escaped, it's fortunate that he was injured and chased out of the Purple Moon Kingdom. The only fortunate thing was that the King of Assassins was severely injured and chased out of the Purple Moon Kingdom. In this case, they should not have to worry about the King of Assassins' threat for a short period of time. Although I expected this, I still feel a little unsatisfied. After a while, Zaloyan smiled bitterly. It had been a long time since the attack on the Sydney family, so they had gradually calmed down. After calming down, they naturally had a rough idea of the possibility of the royal family of the Purple Moon Kingdom killing the King of Assassins. Although they had already expected the King of Assassins to escape, they could not help but feel disappointed when they heard the news. The King of Assassins isn't the culprit. The real culprit is the faction that hired the King of Assassins. That's the Sydney family's biggest enemy. Master Tulu sighed and said, "Yes, the one that hired the King of Assassins is the real culprit," Darren said with a cold expression. What he hated the most now was not the King of Assassins, but the faction that hired the King of Assassins. That was the real culprit that caused the attack on the Sydney family. I wonder how the royal family's investigation is going. There hasn't been any news regarding this. Polly frowned and said, "Another dozen days later, the royal family sent news. The one that hired the King of Assassins to attack the Sydney family was the president of the Black Gold Merchant Guild. Before the royal family took action, the president had already committed suicide by consuming poison. How could it be the Black Gold Merchant Guild? Regardless of whether it was Gray or Zero's group, none of them believed this outcome. The president of a merchant guild had the ability to obtain precious evolution herbs and use them to hire the King of Assassins. No matter how they looked at it, it was very strange. However, the royal family of the Purple Moon Kingdom's investigation would not be wrong. In other words, it was indeed this person who hired the King of Assassins to attack the Sydney family. The Sydney family knows about the Black Gold Merchant Guild? Gray asked in bewilderment. No, the Sydney family has never dealt with the Black Gold Merchant Guild. They don't even know about the existence of such a merchant guild. Zaloyan shook his head. The president of the Black Gold Merchant Guild must have been instructed by another faction. Earl Fergus said, "The Wallen family. It must be the Wallen family who instructed the president of the Black Gold Merchant Guild. Darren's face was ashen. With the death of the president of the Black Gold Merchant Guild, there are no more clues. It will be very difficult to trace this matter back to the Wallen family. Gray frowned. The royal family should be able to guess that it was the Wallen family, but there are no more clues. The royal family can't just make a move against the Wallen family based on guesses. Zaloyan's eyes revealed a cold, killing intent. That's good too. We should take revenge for our own family. I don't have any hope for the king of assassins, but the Wallen family, our Sydney family, will not let them off. Yes, we will take revenge for ourselves. Darren's eyes were also filled with determination. He had always been at odds with Zaloyan, but after experiencing the Sydney family's calamity, he had long since given up on his enmity with Zaloyan. Now, only the three of them were left in the Sydney family. He knew very well that if they could not unite, it would be impossible for the Sydney family to rise again. Yes, we will take revenge for our family. Seeing that her eldest brother and second brother had buried the hatchet, Polly's eyes were filled with both excitement and regret. She was excited to finally see the two of them bury the hatchet, but regretful that her father and mother would never be able to see this scene. Gray, I have a favor to ask of you. Zaloyan looked at Gray with a solemn expression. Young Master Zaloyan, please speak. As long as it is within my power, I will not refuse. Seeing the solemn expression on Zaloyan's face, Gray said firmly, I would like you to escort us to the royal capital. Zaloyan said, To the royal capital? Gray looked at Zaloyan in confusion. Yes, to the royal capital. Zaloyan nodded. Although the royal family already knows that the three of us are still alive in the Sydney family, to inherit the title, you must personally make a trip to the royal capital, and within a year. If you exceed this time, you will be considered to have given up your right to inherit the title. I am worried that the Wallen family will interfere. Currently, in the Sydney territory, only you have the strength to contend with the Wallen family, so I request that you escort us to the royal capital. No problem. Without much consideration, Gray nodded in agreement. If the Sydney family could not inherit the title, the Fergus family would also lose their title and fief. Whether it was to help the Sydney family or for the Fergus family, he had to make a trip to the royal capital. Moreover, he had long been curious about the royal capital of the Purple Moon Kingdom, the most prosperous city in the entire professional kingdom. This time, he could use this opportunity to take a look. Chapter 327. A carriage without a family insignia drove out of the Fergus family castle. Zero, his siblings, and Gray were in the carriage. Master Tulu didn't follow, as he chose to stay with the Fergus family. Apart from the coachman, there were no other guards. It was naturally better to be as inconspicuous as possible on this trip to the royal capital. With Gray's current level, ordinary guards wouldn't be of any use against the enemies they were going to face. On the contrary, they would only draw attention and become a burden. Thus, they chose not to bring any guards with them. A few days later, they left the Sydney territory and entered Marquis Orca's territory. Along the way, they were extremely low-key, and even the clothes they wore were extremely ordinary in order to not attract attention. Unfortunately, they were still noticed after entering the Sydney territory. Lord Marquis, Gray Fergus severely injured me, causing me to rest for a few months before recovering. Lord Marquis, please seek justice for me. In the living room of Vallon Castle, an old man in his 50s with light brown hair spoke with grief and indignation. He was the head of the Mesty family who had been severely injured by Gray. He actually attacked a noble of the Orca family and seriously injured him. He was indeed too ruthless. Marquis Orca was an old man with a round face and a mustache. He had a slightly angry expression on his face as he spoke sternly. He naturally didn't just know that Earl Mesty had been severely injured a few months ago. He had already known about it from the very beginning. It was just that Gray had the powerful Sydney family behind him at that time, and the Sydney family's marquis had even driven the copperback dragon past his territory. He naturally didn't dare to stand up for the Mesty family. Now that Earl Mesty had brought up the matter again, and the Sydney family was no longer what it used to be. He also felt aggrieved that he had been frightened by the Sydney family last time, so he changed his mind. 2 days later, Accompanied by the rumbling sound of horse hooves, a group of over 100 people blocked the path of Gray's carriage. "Gray Fergus, come out." The old man at the front stared coldly at the carriage and loudly shouted, "It's you." Gray, Zero, and Young walked out of the carriage. Seeing the person who had spoken, Gray raised his eyebrows and spoke. "Looks like the lesson I taught you last time wasn't enough. You actually dare to appear in front of me again." The person who had spoken was the head of the Mesty family. Someone who's about to die still dares to be so arrogant. Thinking of the grievance of being seriously injured by Gray, the family head's expression turned gloomy as he said coldly, I'll break you, the old man who had been the Fergus a few days. The old marquis of the families, the old marquis of a marquis of the families. As to the face twos to assesses, as to the twos to the mardos, this was a slightly plump old man dressed in black. His eyes were small, but there was a sharp glint in them. "You're indeed arrogant. You don't even know how to restrain yourself in my Orca territory." Looking at Gray, the plump old man spoke coldly with his hands behind his back. "Greetings, Grandpa Dave." Seeing the old man, Zero raised his eyebrows and stepped forward. "You're Zero from the Sydney family?" The chubby old man glanced at Zhao and recognized his identity. "Yes, Grandpa Dave." The conflict between the Mesty family and Gray wasn't Gray's fault. "I hope Grandpa Dave can let him off." Zero lowered his stance and spoke. The Orca family had complained to the Sydney family about Gray injuring Earl Mesty. However, after understanding the situation, the Sydney family naturally ignored their complaints. I don't need you to judge for me. Seeing that your Sydney family has a good relationship with my Orca family, you can leave." Dave snorted coldly. "As for him, you don't have to care about him. If I don't kill him, the Orca family will lose face. If it was the Sydney family of the past, he wouldn't have dared to disrespect them. Unfortunately, the Sydney family only had 3 members now. The copperback dragon that they relied on had been killed. Naturally, he didn't care about the Sydney family." Zero's face turned pale. Although he knew that the Sydney family no longer had the prestige they had in the past, he didn't expect them to be so merciless. "Kill me? You think you can?" Gray looked at the old man from the Orca family with a strange expression. During the battle with the Wallen family, he had used 4 barbarian-level blood fiends. The Wallen family had 2 barbarian blood warriors for berserk blood warriors and many ferocious blood warriors, but they were no match for him. Now, the old man was alone, yet he dared to say that he wanted to kill him. Was he powerful, or did he not know that Zero could control 4 barbarian-level blood fiends? However, the old man was only a member of the Marquis family. Furthermore, he could only be ranked below average in the Marquis family. Logically speaking, he shouldn't have the strength of a desolate blood warrior. Darren and Polly also looked at the old man with angry and strange expressions. They were angry that the old man looked down on the Sydney family and strange that he wanted to kill Gray alone. As for the 100 or so people behind the old man, they could naturally see that there weren't any powerful blood warriors among them. Let's not talk about the fact that the Fergus family didn't bring the barbarian-level blood fiend here. Even if they did, they wouldn't be Lord Diff's match. Earl Mesfy's eyes flashed with a sinister glint. "Lord Diff, this person is too arrogant. He doesn't even take you seriously." The slightly plump old man was also furious. A young man in his early 20s actually dared to speak to him in such a manner. He couldn't help but feel his anger rising. With a cold snort, a terrifying winding lightning bolt suddenly appeared in front of him. It emitted a bluish-white glow, like a terrifying lightning bolt falling from a thunderstorm, and attacked Gray. Gray's expression didn't change, and he didn't make any movements. However, 2 gigantic blood fiends had already appeared in front of him. One of them was 7 meters tall and had a humanoid form. It was the iron-armed barbarian ape. The other was 5 meters long and had a black carapace all over its body. It seemed to be made of black metal and had a metallic texture. Boom! The 2 gigantic arms of the iron-armed barbarian ape transformed into a gigantic shield and blocked the bluish-white lightning bolt. With a loud bang, the iron-armed barbarian ape retreated continuously. However, its iron arms were still intact, and there were no traces of scorch marks. At the same time, the brute force ant used its 8 legs to quickly crawl toward the slightly plump old man. The black carapace all over its body made it look like a sturdy armored vehicle. The gigantic mouthpart on its head constantly rubbed against each other, emitting a hair-raising sound. No one doubted its sharpness. A large-scale rune space bag, and you can actually control 2 barbarian-level blood fiends. Seeing the sudden appearance of the blood fiends in front of Gray, the slightly plump old man's expression changed slightly. After taking a closer look at the 2 blood fiends, his expression completely changed. Fang Xingjian had a large-scale rune space bag and could carry blood fiends around with him. Moreover, he could actually control 2 barbarian-level blood fiends. Seeing the brute force ant charging toward him like a steel chariot, the slightly plump old man shot out a bluish-white lightning bolt and blasted the brute force ant away. However, at this moment, he actually saw a gigantic fist rapidly hammering toward him. Without much time to think, he drew his saber and slashed. Clang! The saber slashed down, but it was as if it had hit a steel plate. He couldn't force the gigantic beast to retreat, and he couldn't even leave a wound on the gigantic fist. Clang, clang, clang. The saber and the gigantic fist collided several times, but there was still no wound on the gigantic fist. At this moment, the brute force ant that had been blasted away by the lightning bolt got up again and charged toward him. Although there was a scorch mark on the opponent's body, it was obviously not serious. A bolt of lightning forced the iron-armed barbarian ape back, and he narrowly avoided the brute force ant's attack. You have a large-scale rune space bag? Not far away, Master Mesfi's expression completely changed. He looked at Gray in horror. When he saw Gray walking toward him, he couldn't help but retreat in fear. Just now, you said that you would break all the bones in my body and torture me to death. Grim grinned, revealing his white teeth. How can you control 2 barbarian-level blood fiends? Master Mesfi's expression changed again and again. He knew that he wasn't a match for Gray. His biggest reliance was the barbarian blood warrior from the Orca family. Now that the barbarian blood warrior was entangled by 2 barbarian-level blood fiends, he was completely at a disadvantage and couldn't even protect himself. How could he possibly have the ability to save him? Attack him together with me. Besiege him. He clenched his teeth and loudly ordered the more than 100 people who followed him. Meanwhile, he made the soil and stone splatter, and a large amount of soil gathered into a gigantic earth snake that attacked Gray. Although he wasn't a match for Grim, he wasn't alone now. There were more than 100 people, and they weren't strong enough. He didn't believe that he couldn't defeat Grim. For a moment, the gigantic earth snake rushed to the front. Several other blood fiends' abilities mixed together and attacked Gray together. There were also more than 100 people who rushed toward Gray with weapons in their hands. Faced with the blood fiend's abilities and more than 100 people's attacks, Gray sneered. In front of him, 5 icy wind blades were slashed out. Puff, puff, puff. The 5 icy wind blades were like 5 divine weapons. They shattered the incoming blood fiend's abilities and continued on their way towards 100 or so people. Those who stood in front of the icy wind blades were cut in half without exception. Some people were even cut in half along with their weapons. After the 5 icy wind blades, more than half of the more than 100 people who rushed toward Gray were dead. The ground was full of broken corpses and ice sculptures. Those who were lucky enough to survive were first stunned, then frightened, and all of them turned around and fled. Among them, the head of the Mesfi family was at the front. Just now, after attacking the earth snake, he, as a berserker, intentionally fell behind the group. Gray's expression was cold. He looked at the head of the Mesfi family, who was running at the front. An icy wind blade swiftly shot out in front of him. Puff! The head of the Mesfi family, who was running at the front, suddenly felt a chill in his left leg. A sharp pain came. He lowered his head and saw that his left leg was broken from the thigh. There was also a terrifying chill spreading across his body. With a thud, he turned into an ice sculpture and smashed onto the ground like a stone. Chapter 328. Run, run, quickly. The people who had besieged Gray were frightened out of their wits. They fled frantically with faces full of horror. There were more than 100 people, including the head of the Mesfi family, but under the attack of the other party, almost half of them died in an instant. They were completely scared out of their wits. Unfortunately, it was easier said than done to escape from Gray. Swish, swish, swish. The icy wind blades were like the scythe of the Grim Reaper. Every time an icy wind blade slashed, a few people would be killed. Some were directly hit by the icy wind blades and were split into two halves. Some were invaded by the cold air and were directly frozen to death. A few people with the strength of a ferocious warrior wanted to resist, but it was futile. Their blood fiend's abilities were easily shattered like glass in front of the icy wind blades. More than 10 icy wind blades slashed past. Other than those who were frozen to death, no one was able to stand. Crack! The head of the Mesfi family struggled with all his might and finally broke free from the ice on his body. Pa pa pa! At this moment, he heard footsteps behind him approaching at a moderate pace. The footsteps were not loud, but they made him panic and frightened. It was as if the person walking towards him was not a person, but a huge barbarian-level blood fiend. His left leg was broken, so he could not stand at all. He could only crawl forward with both hands, leaving behind a drag trail. He was indeed a ferocious warrior. Even if he was crawling, his speed was extremely fast. His figure was crawling further and further away. Why are you in such a hurry to leave? Didn't you want to break all the bones in my body? Gray's expression was ice cold. In front of him, another icy wind blade whizzed out. The head of the Mesfi family's expression changed. He turned over and dodged to the side, but the icy wind blade was too fast. Pop! His right hand was cut off at the wrist and flew high into the air. His whole body was frozen again. Gray walked to the head of the Mesfi family step by step at a moderate pace and looked down at him with a cold expression. Last time, because he was afraid of the Orca family, he had only severely injured him and did not kill him. But this time, he was not going to hold back. Now his strength was several times stronger than before. The only families that could make him afraid were those that were ranked at the top of the Marquis family. As for the Orca family, which was ranked at the bottom of the Marquis family, he was not afraid at all. Crack! Breaking free from the ice on his body once again, the head of the Mesfi clan was trembling all over. It was unknown whether it was because he was scared or because he was cold. You can't kill me. He raised his head and met Gray's cold gaze. He tried to put on a strong front. You want to kill me, so why can't I kill you? Gray looked at him playfully. I'm an earl of the Orca family. If you kill me, the Orca family will never let you off. At the mention of the Orca family, the head of the Mesfi clan became more confident and threatened. Do you think the Orca family can do anything to me? Gray looked in a direction. In that direction, the chubby old man of the Orca family was fighting with two barbarian-level blood fiends. Under the siege of the two barbarian-level blood fiends, the chubby old man of the Orca family was in a perilous situation. He was at a complete disadvantage. The clothes on his body were tattered, and he was not much better than a beggar. One of his arms was hanging down weakly. It looked like it was fractured. Seeing the miserable state of the chubby old man of the Orca family, the head of the Mesfi clan narrowed his eyes. His heart was palpitating. The old man of the Orca family was indeed not a match for the two barbarian-level blood fiends. However, he still pretended to be confident and said, Are you sure you want to be enemies with the Orca family? The background of the Marquis family is not something you can imagine. Do you think that the Orca family only has one barbarian blood warrior? I won't underestimate the Orca family that much. Gray smiled and shook his head, then said, But if the Orca family really wants to avenge you, I don't mind fighting with them. Gray waved his left hand, which was wearing a purple metal ring. Suddenly, the two giant blood fiends appeared again. One of them was a fanged boar with black fur and was as big as a small hill. One of them was a ghost blade mantis that was green all over and had two exaggeratedly huge sabers. The two giant blood fiends were released from the space by Gray. Immediately, they moved their huge bodies and strode towards the place where the battle was still ongoing. You can actually control the barbarian-level blood fiends. Seeing the appearance of the two barbarian-level blood fiends, the stubbornness on Master Mesfi's face collapsed like a weathered rock. His face was lifeless, and only despair was left in his heart. The Orca family indeed had more than one barbarian blood warrior, but the other party could also control more than two barbarian-level blood fiends. Faced with the other party, who could control four barbarian-level blood fiends, would the Orca family still stand up for him? He felt that things were not going well. "Don't kill me, I was wrong. When he judged that even the Orca family wouldn't be able to protect him, at this moment, he became completely flustered. "Don't you think it's too late now?" Gray sneered. "If you didn't come looking for me, I wouldn't have bothered with you. Now that you've come looking for me, do you think I'll let you go? You'll die a horrible death. I'll fight with you." Master Mesfi's face became ferocious because of his despair. Suddenly, a yellow giant snake rose up and attacked Gray. At the same time, his body, which was lying on the ground, suddenly jumped up and pounced on Gray. The target of the earth snake's attack was not only Gray, but also himself. In desperation, he finally decided to fight with his life on the line. Faced with Master Mesfi's desperate attack, Gray remained calm. A wind blade slashed out in front of him like a boning knife, splitting the earth snake into two halves from head to toe. The sword in his hand was surrounded by lightning, and he stabbed it toward Master Mesfi's chest. The lightning sword pierced through Master Mesfi's chest. Master Mesfi's eyes were wide open, and his face was filled with hatred as he stared at Gray. Gray did not seem to care. He swung his sword and threw Master Mesfi's corpse away. Four barbarian-level blood fiends. He can actually control four barbarian-level blood fiends. Seeing that two more barbarian-level blood fiends were attacking him, the face of the slightly plump elder from the Orca family turned as pale as a sheet of paper. Two barbarian-level blood fiends had already forced him into a dangerous situation. Now that two more barbarian-level blood fiends joined the fray, how could he be a match for them? Crackle, crackle, crackle. Numerous lightning bolts shot out toward the iron-armed barbarian apes and the brute force ants. Bang, bang. Under the sudden explosion of the terrifying lightning, the two blood fiends were sent flying. His face lit up, and he turned to flee without hesitation. If he was surrounded by four barbarian-level blood fiends, he would definitely die. Woo! At this moment, a humming sound was heard. Then, he felt his eardrums vibrate violently. An invisible force came and slammed into his body. He was sent flying and crashed heavily onto the ground. His body was covered with scratches, and his clothes were almost torn to shreds. Faint traces of blood seeped out of his ears, which were caused by the terrifying sound waves. Whoosh! He got up from the ground, and the shock on his face deepened. He did not have time to check his injuries. Instead, he found a direction and turned to flee. He originally thought that he was just a member of the Earl's family that he could easily deal with. He did not expect that the other party would have such a powerful demonic weapon and could control four barbarian-level blood fiends to fight for him. The brute force ants ran with their 8 legs and blocked his path. He hurriedly moved to the side. Suddenly, a fist that was as thick as a water tank came crashing down from the side. He could not dodge in time and was directly hit by the fist. His body was sent flying again. His chest, which was hit by the huge fist, was badly mutilated. He spat out a mouthful of blood. Enduring the intense pain, he got up from the ground. At this moment, a huge jade-green praying mantis swung its 2 huge sickles and pounced on him. Under the siege of the 4 barbarian-level blood fiends, the wounds on his body kept increasing. He unleashed his blood fiend ability again, but he still could not break through the siege of the 4 barbarian-level blood fiends. Gray, the other party, is a member of the Okamarki family. If you kill him, you will definitely incur the wrath of the royal family of the Purple Moon Kingdom. Although they already knew that Gray had made a deal with a mysterious existence and upgraded his original magic weapon, allowing him to control for barbaric-level blood fiends. When they saw Gray controlling for barbaric-level blood fiends with their own eyes, Zero and his siblings still couldn't help but feel a little apprehensive. The strength that Gray displayed today was not much different from that of an ordinary member of the Marquis family. Even if there was a slight difference, it would not be too big. Faced with such an opponent, there would be very few members of the Marquis family who would be willing to become enemies with him. After all, even if they could kill him, they would have to pay a huge price. I won't kill him. Gray shook his head. Naturally, he had no intention of standing on the opposite side of the royal family of the Purple Moon Kingdom. What he wanted to do was to teach the other party an unforgettable lesson. After a while, the slightly plump old man from the Orca family was covered in wounds. Many of his bones were broken. He struggled on the ground for a while, but he could not get up immediately. The ground around him was filled with his blood. Orca family, if you want to avenge the Mesfi family, you better think carefully. Next time, I will not be so gentle. After shooting a cold glance at the old man, Gray turned around and returned to the carriage. He signaled the coachman to drive the carriage away. A few days later, Gray and the others had already left the Marquis of Orca territory. The Orca family did not come for revenge. They were obviously intimidated by the strength that Gray had displayed. Obviously, the Orca family did not have the determination to kill Gray at the cost of their own lives. Thump, thump, thump. The carriage traveled through the desolate wilderness. Suddenly, the earth quaked and the mountains swayed. In the distance, a giant creature that was more than 10 meters tall was striding towards them.